Sarah Thompson, a retired principal, discovers her beloved Lake Haven Cottage is worth $1.2 million, sparking dreams of financial security for her son Ethan's family. But her excitement turns to dread when Ethan and his wife Melissa propose a lavish renovation, funded by a loan Sarah never approved. Tensions rise as Sarah uncovers unauthorized demolition at the cottage, revealing forged signatures in a $350,000 loan in her name. Betrayed by her own son, Sarah faces a gut-wrenching dilemma: protect her legacy or forgive her family. What secrets will unravel as she fights to reclaim her sanctuary? If Sarah's gripping story of betrayal and resilience touched you, please subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world and keeps these compelling tales coming. Click that button, share with friends, and join us tomorrow for another unforgettable story. Thank you for being part of our community. I never imagined I'd become the kind of mother-in-law who'd change the locks on her own vacation home. But life has a way of unraveling your expectations, one quiet betrayal at a time. It wasn't just about my kitchen being rearranged, though that stung more than I'd care to admit. It was about 30 years of boundaries being nudged, crossed, and sometimes outright ignored, one subtle shift of my spice rack after another. The morning it all began was one of those crisp Michigan autumn days where the air hums with the promise of frost and the leaves glow like embers against the gray sky. I stood in my kitchen, my sanctuary, my haven, cradling a steaming mug of coffee, the one my late mother had given me decades ago, its familiar weight grounding me. The phone rang just as I was pouring a second cup, the sharp trill cutting through the stillness. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Claudia Jenkins from Lakeside Realty," the voice on the other end announced, cheerful but professional. I'd almost forgotten about the property assessment I'd requested months earlier for Lake Haven Cottage, the family retreat that had been in my blood for 3 generations. It had passed from my grandparents to my parents and finally to me, each summer weaving memories into its weathered walls. My ex-husband, Robert, and I had spent countless Julys there with our son, Ethan, laughing over bonfires and fishing off the dock. Those memories had been my lifeline through the dark years after our divorce, when I was left to piece together a life for Ethan and me alone. "I've completed the evaluation," Claudia continued, her tone bright with excitement, "and I think you'll be thrilled. The property's value has tripled since your last assessment 15 years ago." I nearly dropped my mug, coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "Tripled?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you certain?" "Absolutely," she replied. "Waterfront properties in Pine Ridge are in high demand. We're looking at a conservative valuation of $1.2 million. The world tilted beneath me, my knees wobbling as I gripped the counter. At 62, retired from a long career as a school principal, I'd made peace with my modest life. My teacher's pension covered the bills for my cozy colonial in Cedar Grove, but there was little room for extravagance. This news was a seismic shift, a sudden opening of doors I'd long assumed were locked. "If you're interested in selling, I already have several potential buyers," Claudia added, her words dangling possibilities I hadn't dared to dream of. "I'll need to think about it," I managed, my mind already spiraling through a kaleidoscope of what-ifs. After hanging up, I sank into a chair at my kitchen table, the cottage's familiar nooks and crannies vivid in my mind. It had been my refuge through the storm of my divorce, a place where I could escape the weight of the world. I'd paid the taxes even when money was so tight I skipped meals, restored its sagging porch and peeling paint with my own hands, pouring love into every weathered board. But $1.2 million, that kind of money could rewrite my future, secure my retirement in ways I'd never imagined. I could breathe easier, maybe even take that European river cruise I'd secretly pined for, flipping through travel brochures late at night when sleep wouldn't come. My thoughts turned to Ethan, my only son, and his young family. He and his wife, Melissa, were scraping by, trying to save for a bigger home now that they had 2 children. My grandchildren, Noah and Emma. Ethan worked grueling hours in marketing, his face often lined with exhaustion when we spoke. Melissa, a talented interior designer, was building a career she loved, but the housing market was merciless to young families like theirs. I thought of Robert, who'd walked away from our marriage 20 years ago, leaving me to raise Ethan alone. The sting of those years still lingered, The extra jobs I took, the dreams I shelved, the pennies I pinched to ensure Ethan could go to college without drowning in debt. I'd made peace with the pennies, proud of the man Ethan had become despite his father's absence. Now, with this windfall on the horizon, I could help him in ways I'd never thought possible. I could set up college funds for Noah and Emma, give them the kind of start I'd fought so hard to give Ethan. I could be the mother, the grandmother, who made a tangible difference in their lives. That evening, I called Ethan, my heart lighter than it had been in years. "Mom, we were just talking about you," he said, his voice warm over the sound of Noah and Emma giggling in the background. "We're planning to come visit this weekend. Is that okay?" "It's perfect," I replied, excitement bubbling up. "I have wonderful news to share. I'm thinking of selling the cottage." There was a pause, a beat of silence that carried a weight I couldn't quite read. "The cottage?" he said, surprise lacing his words. "But Mom, you love that place." "I do," I admitted, "but things change. We'll talk when you're here. I'm thinking about the future, our futures." We chatted about the kids, his job, Melissa's latest design project, but my mind was already racing ahead to the weekend, to the moment I'd share this life-changing possibility with them. I spent the next few days in a haze of anticipation, planning how I'd break the news. I even called my old friend Dorothy, Dot, as everyone called her, to share the revelation. "That's incredible, Sarah," she said, her voice warm but tinged with caution. "But are you sure about selling? That cottage has been your anchor since the divorce." I brushed off her concern, caught up in the vision of what this money could do. "I'm thinking practically now, Dot. I can help Ethan and his family, secure my retirement, maybe even enjoy life a little. The upkeep's getting to be too much for me anyway." "Just make sure you're doing this for the right reasons," she warned gently. "Not just because you think it's what Ethan would want." I waved away her words, too swept up in the possibilities to dwell on doubts. That weekend, I threw myself into preparations, cooking Ethan's favorite pot roast with rosemary potatoes, the kitchen filling with the comforting aroma of home. I baked an apple pie, its golden crust a nod to the Sunday dinners of his childhood. I set the dining room table with my good china, the set I'd packed away after Robert left, its delicate floral pattern, too painful a reminder of the family we'd once been. When Ethan, Melissa, and the kids arrived Saturday afternoon, the house came alive with their energy. Noah barreled into my arms, chattering about his soccer team, his eyes bright with the unbridled joy of a 6-year-old. Emma, quieter at 4, shyly showed me her newest stuffed bunny, clutching it like a treasure. Melissa handed me a bouquet of autumn flowers, vibrant chrysanthemums and goldenrod, her smile warm as she hugged me. "The house smells amazing, Mom," Ethan said, hanging their coats with a grin that mirrored his father's in a way that still caught me off guard. Dinner was a slice of perfection, the kind of evening that wraps around your heart and holds it tight. We laughed over Noah's stories, savored the pea, and for a moment I felt whole, surrounded by the family I'd fought so hard to nurture. After the kids were settled in front of a movie, I poured coffee and joined Ethan and Melissa in the living room. "So tell us about this cottage news," Ethan said, leaning forward, his curiosity palpable. I took a deep breath and laid it all out. The staggering valuation, my thoughts about selling, the financial freedom it would bring. "And I want to help you buy that house you've been eyeing," I finished, my voice steady with conviction. "A generous down payment would make it possible, and there'd still be plenty for Noah and Emma's college funds." Ethan's face lit up, his eyes shining with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. But Melissa's expression was harder to read, her brow furrowed as she glanced at Ethan before speaking. "That's incredibly generous, Sarah," she said, her voice measured. "But are you sure about selling the cottage? It's been in your family for generations." Her words caught me off guard, stirring a flicker of doubt I hadn't expected. "I've thought it through," I assured her, though my heart gave a small, uneasy lurch. "At my age, I have to be practical. The property's upkeep is more than I can manage, and I'd rather see the money do good for all of us while I'm still here to see it." Ethan reached for my hand, his grip warm and steady. "We appreciate this more than you know, Mom," he said. "But let's sleep on it, okay? It's a big decision." That night, as I lay in bed, I heard their voices drifting from the guest room, low and urgent, occasionally spiking before softening again. I tried not to listen, but fragments slipped through, words like opportunity, investment, perfect timing. My stomach twisted, a quiet unease settling in. Had I misread their reaction? Were they as excited as I was, or was something else at play? Over Sunday breakfast, Ethan brought it up again, his tone careful but eager. Mom, we've been thinking about your offer. It's beyond generous. He glanced at Melissa, who nodded, her eyes bright with a new kind of energy. But we have another idea. What if, instead of selling, we renovate the cottage? Modernize it, make it more comfortable for you, and turn it into a place we can all enjoy for years to come. I blinked, caught off guard. Renovations are expensive, I said slowly, and the whole point was to free up the equity. Melissa leaned forward, her designer's passion igniting. We could take out a home equity loan on the property. With the new valuation, we'd qualify for enough to make significant upgrades. Then we could rent it out during peak seasons through a management company. The rental income would cover the loan payments, and you'd have extra income on top. I looked between them, my mind struggling to keep up with this sudden shift. But what about your down payment? The house you wanted? Ethan shrugged, his smile easy but determined. We can wait a bit longer. This makes more financial sense in the long run. The property's value will only grow, especially after renovations. Their enthusiasm was infectious, pulling me into their vision of a revitalized Lake Haven Cottage, a modern retreat that could stay in the family while still yielding financial benefits. Melissa's eyes sparkled as she talked about sleek kitchens with lakefront views, cozy yet updated bedrooms, an expanded deck for summer evenings. We could start right away, she said, her excitement spilling over. I know excellent contractors, and I've been dying to redesign a lakefront property. I found myself nodding, swept up in their dream despite the nagging unease in my chest. I suppose we could discuss it, I said, my voice tentative, as I tried to process the change in plans. They spent the rest of the morning showing me inspiration photos on Melissa's tablet, each image painting a picture of a cottage transformed yet still ours. By the time they left that evening, I tentatively agreed to their plan, though a quiet disquiet lingered like a shadow I couldn't quite shake. The following week, Claudia Jenkins called again, her voice bright with the updates about potential buyers. I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the phone, the weight of my decision heavier than I'd expected. The phone call from Claudia, my real estate agent, came as a gentle nudge, pulling me back into the swirling thoughts about Lake Haven Cottage. Her voice was calm, but carried the weight of opportunity. Sarah, I wanted to check in about our last conversation. I've got a potential buyer who's eager to see the property this weekend. They were ready to come with a strong offer. Her words hung in the air, stirring a mix of excitement and unease in my chest. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before explaining the new direction we were considering. We've been thinking about keeping the cottage, Claudia. The plan is to renovate it, maybe turn it into a rental. My voice wavered slightly, betraying the uncertainty I hadn't fully admitted to myself. Claudia's response was measured, her tone laced with professional caution. That's certainly a possibility, Sarah, but renovations on older properties can spiral beyond what you expect, and the rental market isn't always predictable. Her words mirrored the quiet doubts I'd been shoving to the back of my mind, but I brushed them aside, clinging to the vision my son Ethan and his wife Melissa had painted so vividly. Thanks for the heads up, Claudia, but I think we're set on moving forward with the renovation. My words sounded more confident than I felt, buoyed by the enthusiasm of Ethan and Melissa, who saw the cottage not just as a house, but as a legacy we could reshape and pass down. After hanging up, I dialed Dot, my closest friend, whose sharp insight always cut through my indecision. I spilled the details of Ethan and Melissa's ambitious proposal, tearing down walls, modernizing the kitchen, turning the cottage into a sleek rental that could fund family vacations for years to come. Dot listened quietly before asking, "And what do you want, Sarah?" Her question hit like a pebble in still water, rippling through my thoughts. I faltered. I'm not entirely sure anymore. Keeping the cottage in the family feels right, and they're so excited about it. My voice trailed off, revealing the tug-of-war between my heart and my head. Dot's gentle but firm reminder came next. It's your property, Sarah, your decision. Don't let their enthusiasm sweep you into something you're not ready for. I promised her I'd take my time, but even as I spoke, I could feel the momentum building. Like a train, I wasn't sure I could stop. By Friday, Melissa had emailed me a set of preliminary design plans, her excitement leaping off the screen in detailed sketches and notes about modern fixtures and open spaces. By Monday, she'd already lined up a contractor to inspect the cottage, and by Wednesday, Ethan called to discuss a home equity loan. "It's straightforward, Mom," he said, his voice brimming with confidence. "We just need you to sign some paperwork to authorize a loan application. Since the property's in your name, you'd be the primary borrower, but don't worry, Melissa and I will handle all the payments." His assurance was like a warm blanket, comforting but heavy. The vision they described, a beautifully renovated family retreat, a place for future generations to make memories, felt like a dream I couldn't resist. I agreed, caught up in their energy, imagining laughter echoing through a revitalized cottage. 2 weeks later, I drove up to Lake Haven Cottage with Ethan and Melissa to meet the contractor. The autumn landscape was a masterpiece, with leaves in fiery reds and golds framing the lake's glassy surface. The cottage stood as it always had, its weathered gray siding and faded blue shutters a familiar anchor amidst the vibrant scenery. Walking through its rooms felt like stepping into a scrapbook of my life. Each creak of the floorboards whispered memories. My father teaching me to cast a fishing line off the dock. My mother's laughter as we picked blackberries along the forest path. Ethan's small hands splashing in the shallow cove during his first swim lessons. Even after the divorce, when money was scarce and emotions were raw, I'd brought Ethan here every summer, determined to give him a slice of stability. Those memories wrapped around me like a warm shawl as we toured the cottage with the contractor, who scribbled notes while Melissa shared her vision with infectious enthusiasm. Her plans grew grander with every step. She talked of knocking down walls for an open floor plan, expanding the master bedroom, adding a loft for the kids, and completely gutting the vintage kitchen I'd tended with care over the years. The contractor nodded, adding his own observations. "Plumbing and electrical need a full overhaul," he said, his pencil never pausing. "And the foundation on the lakeside's showing some wear." My stomach tightened as the scope of the project ballooned. "How much are we looking at for all this?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He glanced at his notes. "Rough estimate? Between $280,000 and $320,000. The number hit me like a cold wave. That was nearly a third of the cottage's value. Melissa jumped in, her voice bright with optimism. "It'll boost the property's value significantly, Sarah. And with modern amenities, the rental income will be so much higher." But as they dove into discussions of granite countertops and hardwood floors, I slipped out to the deck, the lake stretching before me like a mirror, reflecting my swirling thoughts. Standing there, I felt the weight of the cottage's history. This was where my father had taught me patience, where my mother had shared stories of her own childhood, where Ethan had learned to swim. Even in the darkest times, this place had been my sanctuary. Now, hearing Melissa and the contractor talk about tearing out the stone fireplace my grandfather had built with his own hands, a pang of loss gripped me. This wasn't about preserving the cottage. It was about erasing it, replacing its soul with something polished and unrecognizable. But hadn't I been ready to sell it just weeks ago? Was I clinging to sentimentality, letting nostalgia cloud my judgment? The questions churned as I watched the lake's surface ripple under a gentle breeze. That evening, we sat on the deck with glasses of wine, the sunset casting a golden glow across the water. Melissa scrolled through design photos on her tablet, occasionally tilting it toward me for approval, her excitement undimmed. Ethan rattled off rental rates for similar properties, tossing out income projections that felt more hopeful than realistic. Then he shifted gears. "We should talk about the equity loan," he said, his tone casual but deliberate. "The bank needs a bit more documentation from you." My brow furrowed. "Yeah, what kind of documentation?" Just standard stuff," he replied smoothly. "Proof of income, details about your pension, maybe some investment statements. The more assets we show, the better the loan rate." Something in his breezy assurance set off a quiet alarm in my mind. I thought the loan was based on the property's value, not my personal finances, I said, my voice steady but probing. "It is mostly," he assured me. "Your credit profile's just a formality." I nodded, but a seed of unease took root. That night, while Ethan and Melissa slept in the guest room, I sat alone in the kitchen, my fingers tracing the worn grooves of the wooden countertop my father had installed decades ago. Each scratch and stain told a story, a tangible link to the past. By morning, I knew I couldn't rush into this. Over breakfast, I announced my decision. I think we should hold off until spring. Winter's coming, and construction costs might be lower then, plus it gives us time to refine the plans. Melissa's smile flickered, a trace of disappointment crossing her face. But we've already scheduled the contractor, she said. Starting now means we could list it for next summer's rental season. I held firm, my voice calm but resolute. I understand, but this project is bigger than I realized. I'm not comfortable rushing it. Ethan and Melissa exchanged a quick glance before he spoke. Mom, we're just trying to help. This renovation is an investment in all our futures. His words were earnest, but they didn't erase the knot in my stomach. I know, and I'm grateful, I said, standing to signal the conversation's end. Now let's take Noah and Emma to the lake. It's a beautiful morning. We spent a few hours by the water, skipping stones and showing the kids the hidden cove where otters sometimes played. But the easy warmth of past visits was gone, replaced by a subtle tension that lingered like a shadow. On the drive back to Cedar Grove, I resolved to consult my financial advisor. The cottage was my most valuable asset, and I needed clear, unbiased advice about whether renovating or selling made more sense for my future. The following week, Melissa called, her voice bright and inviting. We haven't seen you since the cottage, Sarah. The kids miss their grandma. Come over for dinner? My heart lifted at the thought of seeing Noah and Emma, and I hoped the awkwardness from our last talk had faded. When I arrived at their townhouse that Friday, the air was filled with the rich aroma of an elaborate meal Melissa had prepared, rivaling any fine restaurant. This is amazing, I said as we sat around their dining table. What's the occasion? Ethan grinned, pouring me a glass of wine that looked far too expensive for a casual dinner. Can't we just spoil you a bit? You've done so much for us. The evening flowed easily at first, with the kids sharing school stories and Melissa chatting about her latest design client. Ethan mentioned a potential promotion, his pride evident, but after the kids were tucked into bed, the conversation circled back to the cottage. Melissa spoke first, her tone careful but deliberate. I've been thinking about what you said, about waiting until spring for the renovations. You're right, we shouldn't rush. Relief flooded through me. I'm glad you understand. I just need more time to... But she continued, her words measured. The contractor's willing to start with just the kitchen before winter. It's the most outdated part, and updating it would boost the rental appeal without touching the rest of the house yet. Ethan nodded eagerly. It's a smart move, Mom. We can test the waters with the kitchen, see how it goes, and decide on the rest in spring. I hesitated. The kitchen was outdated. Its ancient appliances had been a headache for years. A smaller project felt like a reasonable compromise, a way to move forward without diving in head first. I suppose the kitchen could use some work, I admitted, my voice cautious but open. As I drove home that night, the warmth of the evening mingled with a lingering unease. The cottage wasn't just a property, it was a piece of my heart, woven with memories I wasn't ready to let go of. But Ethan and Melissa's enthusiasm was infectious, and the idea of a modernized kitchen sparking new life into the cottage was tempting. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to tread carefully, to protect not just my financial future, but the legacy that Lake Haven Cottage held for me and my family. The evening air was cool as I sat across from Ethan and Melissa at the cozy lakeside restaurant, the soft glow of candlelight flickering between us. Their faces radiated enthusiasm, their smiles wide and eager, but I could feel a knot of apprehension tightening in my chest. They wanted to renovate the kitchen of Lake Haven Cottage, my family's cherished retreat, a place woven with decades of memories. I wanted to keep things simple, nothing too grand or disruptive. The cottage was sacred, a haven of rustic charm nestled by the water, its weathered oak cabinets and worn pine floors holding stories of my childhood, my parents' laughter, and countless summer evenings. Ethan and Melissa, though, saw potential for something new, something modern yet respectful of the cottage's soul. Melissa's eyes sparkled with excitement as she pulled out her tablet, swiping through sleek design options that blended contemporary lines with rustic touches, warm wood tones, exposed beams, and soft lighting that promised to honor the cottage's lakeside spirit. Her voice bubbled with ideas, each suggestion painting a picture of a kitchen that could breathe new life into the space while preserving its heart. Ethan leaned forward, his tone gentle but persuasive, assuring me it would enhance the property's value and ensure it remained a family treasure for generations. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and by the time dessert arrived, a rich chocolate torte that melted on my tongue, I found myself nodding along, agreeing to the renovation, set to begin the following month. Melissa's reassurance echoed in my mind. "We'll handle everything, Sarah. You won't have to worry about a thing." Driving home that night, the dark road stretching before me, I felt a swirl of emotions. Relief settled in first. Ethan and Melissa's compromise felt like a bridge between my nostalgia and their vision. Excitement flickered too, the thought of a revitalized kitchen sparking a quiet thrill. But beneath it all, a vague unease lingered, like a shadow I couldn't quite shake. I told myself it was just nerves, the weight of change pressing against my attachment to the past. Ethan and Melissa were good people, I reminded myself. They loved the cottage almost as much as I did. This was a win-win, a way to honor the past while embracing the future. The following Saturday, I sat in the polished office of my financial advisor, Frank Garrison, the scent of coffee and leather-bound books filling the air. Frank's calm demeanor and sharp eyes always grounded me, but today my hands fidgeted as I explained the situation. The cottage's unexpected spike in value, Ethan and Melissa's renovations plans, and their suggestion of an equity loan to fund it. Frank listened intently, his pen scratching notes as I spoke, his brow furrowing slightly. "The property's appreciation is impressive," he said, his voice measured. "But I'm concerned about taking on debt at this point in your life, Sarah, especially for a project of this scope." I repeated Ethan's logic, my voice steady but uncertain. "The rental income will cover the loan payments." Frank nodded, but his expression remained cautious. "Potentially," he said, "but seasonal rentals can be unpredictable. If something unexpected happens, a health issue, a market dip, or other expenses, those loan payments fall on you, regardless of any informal agreement with Ethan." His words landed like a stone in my stomach. I trusted Ethan, my own son, but Frank's pragmatism stirred doubts I hadn't wanted to face. "What would you suggest?" I asked, my voice quieter now. Frank leaned back, his fingers steepled. "If keeping the cottage and the family is your priority, consider a smaller renovation funded from savings, or sell a portion to Ethan and Melissa with a legal agreement ensuring your continued use in eventual inheritance." I left his office with a heavy mind, determined to discuss these options with Ethan and Melissa. But before I could plan another family dinner, my world tilted. 4 days later, my phone rang as I sipped my morning coffee. It was Helen Winters, a seasonal neighbor at Pine Ridge whose cottage sat near mine. We weren't close, but her familiar voice carried an edge of urgency. "Sarah, there's been a lot of activity at your cottage this week," she said, skipping pleasantries. "Trucks, workers, materials, sounds like demolition. I assumed you'd authorized it, but I haven't seen you around, so I thought I should check." My heart lurched, coffee forgotten. "When did this start?" I asked, gripping the phone. "Monday morning," Helen replied. "They've been at it every day." "Demolition?" The word echoed in my mind, sharp and wrong. I thanked her, my voice tight, and immediately dialed Ethan. No answer. I tried Melissa, my pulse racing. When she picked up, her tone was distracted, almost breezy. "Oh, Sarah, yes, we started on the kitchen. Remember, we talked about this at dinner. The contractor had an opening, so we jumped on it. But we agreed to wait until next month," I said, struggling to keep my voice even. "I haven't seen final plans or signed anything for a loan." Melissa's response was maddeningly casual. "Ethan handled all that. We didn't want to bother you with paperwork, and the timing was too good to pass up. The contractor offered a discount if we started now." My blood boiled. "I need to see what's happening," I said firmly. "I'm driving up today." Melissa's voice softened, placating. "There's no need, Sarah. It's just demolition right now, not exciting. Why don't you wait until the weekend? We'll be up Friday and you can see the progress then." But I was already grabbing my purse and keys, my mind racing with the betrayal and disbelief. I'll call when I arrive, I said, cutting her off before she could argue further. The 2-hour drive to Lake Haven Cottage felt endless, each mile fueling my growing anger and dread. They'd started major construction without my final approval. They'd moved forward with a loan I hadn't authorized. What else had they done behind my back? The questions gnawed at me, each one a fresh wound. This was my cottage, my family's legacy, and now it felt like it was slipping through my fingers. When I turned onto the gravel road leading to the cottage, my stomach plummeted. 2 massive dumpsters overflowed with debris in the driveway, jagged pieces of wood and plaster spilling out like the remnants of my memories. A pickup truck and a van marked Elite Renovations were parked carelessly on the lawn, their tires sinking into the soft earth. The front door stood wide open, and the air thrummed with the harsh sounds of hammering and power tools, shattering the peace that had always defined this place. I parked behind the van, my hands shaking as I stepped over piles of lumber and discarded materials, the dust stinging my eyes. Inside, the noise was deafening, and a thick haze of dust choked the air, making me cough. I followed the clamor to the kitchen, or what was left of it. The sight froze me in place. The room was a skeleton of its former self, gutted beyond recognition. The oak cabinets my father had crafted with such care, each knot and grain a testament to his love, were gone. The vintage farmhouse sink, where I'd washed dishes with my mother during endless summer evenings, had been torn out. Even the wide plank pine floors, smoothed by generations of footsteps, were ripped up, exposing raw subfloor. The cozy, memory-filled space I'd cherished was now a barren wasteland of exposed wiring and stripped walls. My heart ached, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe. "Excuse me," I called to a worker, my voice barely cutting through the noise. "I'm the owner. Who's in charge?" He pointed to a tall man hunched over blueprints on a makeshift table in what used to be my dining room. I approached, fury pulsing through me with every step. "I'm Sarah Thompson," I said, my voice sharp. "This is my property, and I did not authorize this demolition." The contractor looked up, his face creasing with confusion. "Ma'am, I have signed contracts and permits. Everything's in order." He rifled through papers and handed me a document. "Authorized by Ethan and Melissa Thompson, with power of attorney from Sarah Thompson." The words hit like a slap. "Power of attorney?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "I never granted anyone power of attorney." He showed me the form, and there it was, my signature or something that looked chillingly like it, granting Ethan authority over the cottage. My blood turned to ice. I'd never signed such a document, never even seen it. "This is fraudulent," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. "Stop work immediately." The contractor shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I can't just stop. The structure's compromised. Load-bearing elements are gone. We need to stabilize it." "Then secure what's dangerous, but don't do anything more," I insisted, my hands trembling as I stepped outside to call Frank. He answered on the third ring, and I poured out the story, my voice cracking as I described the devastation in the forged document. "Don't confront Ethan and Melissa yet," Frank advised, his tone grave. "We need to confirm if a loan was taken out in your name. Document everything. Photos, paperwork, names of everyone involved." I followed his instructions, snapping photos of the wreckage, each click capturing the loss of something irreplaceable. The contractor handed over copies of the plans, and my heart sank further. The simple kitchen renovation had ballooned into a massive overhaul, walls between the kitchen and living room gone, the staircase relocated, the deck extended far beyond what we'd discussed. As I studied the plans, my phone rang. It was Frank, his voice heavy. "Sarah, there's a $350,000 home equity line of credit approved on your property. The funds were dispersed yesterday to an account at First Michigan Bank." My legs nearly buckled. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I never applied for a loan." Frank's voice was grim. "The application used your electronic signature, along with tax returns, bank statements, everything needed for approval." The truth hit me like a tidal wave. My own son had forged my signature, taken out a loan against my property, and started demolishing my home without my consent. "They forged it," I said, the words barely audible, the betrayal cutting deeper than I could have imagined. "We don't know that for sure yet," Frank cautioned, but we need to take this seriously. You should contact the police. My heart recoiled at the thought. Call the police on my own son? I couldn't, not yet. Instead, I hung up, my mind a storm of grief, anger, and disbelief, wondering how the people I trusted most could have shattered my world so completely. The phone rang, Ethan's name glowing on the screen like a warning. My heart sank, heavy with a dread I'd come to know too well. I answered, steeling myself. Mom, is everything okay? His voice carried that practiced concern, but it rang false, a performance I'd seen through. No, Ethan, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos within. Everything is not okay. I stood in the ruins of my kitchen at Lake Haven Cottage, the soul of my family's history, shattered into splintered boards and dangling wires. The air was thick with sawdust and the sting of betrayal. Can you explain why my kitchen's been demolished without my permission? Or why there's a $350,000 loan in my name I never applied for? My words cut through the silence, sharp and unyielding. I could sense Ethan scrambling, his mind racing to spin a story. Mom, we discussed this, he said at last, his calm infuriating. The renovation, the loan, you agreed to it all. The lie burned, unraveling years of trust I'd built around him. I agreed to consider a small kitchen update next month, I snapped, my voice quaking with rage. Not this devastation, and I never signed in loan papers or gave you power of attorney. A long pause followed, heavy with his guilt. You're overreacting, he said, his tone turning cold. Melissa and I are helping. We're boosting the property's value for everyone. His condescension ignited my fury. Did he think I was that gullible? The work stops now, Ethan. Today, I mean it. My resolve was unbreakable, forged in the fire of his deceit. That's not possible, he shot back, his voice hard. We're under contract. There are penalties, and the loan funds are already dispersed. My grip on the phone tightened, knuckles white. To an account I can't access, I said, my voice low and lethal. Did you think I wouldn't notice? He sighed, exasperated, as if I were the problem. Mom, you're being dramatic. Melissa and I have it under control. The cottage will be gorgeous, more valuable, more comfortable. Why can't you trust us? The call dragged on, Ethan deflecting my accusations with dismissals or hollow promises that it was all for my good. Each word deepened the rift between us, leaving me shouting into a void. When I hung up, my hands trembled, and my heart ached with a grief too vast to name. I was empty, betrayed by the son I loved with everything I had. That night, I stayed at the cottage, sleeping in the guest room because my own bedroom was half destroyed. The darkness closed in, and I lay awake, replaying his words, searching for the boy I'd raised. Dawn brought no comfort, but it brought purpose. I called a locksmith, changing every lock to reclaim my space. I told the contractor to secure the property, but stop all work until I untangled Ethan's mess. In Cedar Grove, I met a fraud lawyer, the evidence undeniable. Forged signatures, an unauthorized loan, lies to contractors. These are serious crimes, she said, her tone somber. Criminal charges could follow. Imagining Ethan arrested, my son, the child I'd soothed through nightmares, the boy I'd raised alone, the man I'd given my all for, felt like a blade to my heart. Yet he'd done this, stolen, lied, silenced me. I chose a path that shielded me without ruining him. I filed a fraud claim with the bank, proving I'd never approved the loan. I locked the cottage's deed in an irrevocable trust, untouchable without 3 independent trustees' consent. None family. Then I wrote Ethan and Melissa a letter, exposing their deceit in my actions. I spared them charges, but banned them from the cottage. I ended with a truth that seared my soul. Some betrayals cannot be forgiven. 3 days later, Ethan appeared at my Cedar Grove door, his face haggard, eyes dark with fatigue. Mom, please, he said, voice breaking. We were trying to improve the cottage, make it better for everyone. We didn't mean to hurt you. I looked at him, seeing the baby I'd held, the boy I'd cheered, the son I'd trusted. But all I felt was a dull pain where love once thrived. The contractor's plans weren't for improvements, Ethan, I said, my voice heavy with sorrow. They erased your grandparents' legacy. You forged my signature, took a fraudulent loan and lied repeatedly. It wasn't like that, he said weakly, almost pleading. We got carried away, but our intentions were good. We wanted a space for the family. I shook my head, his excuses crushing me. While burying me in $350,000 of debt at 62, my voice cracked. The bank's investigating. They'll likely seek restitution from you since you took the funds. The consequences are yours. His face drained of color, fear flashing in his eyes. You can't mean that, he whispered. You're my mother. And you're my son, I said, soft but final. That's why you're not in jail. I shut the door, the latches click, deafening. In my kitchen, with my teapot and mugs just as I liked. I made tea, the routine anchoring me as tears fell. I mourned the cottage, its heart gutted by greed. I mourned my son, lost to choices I couldn't fathom. I mourned the mother I'd been, who'd given all, only to stand alone. Ethan and Melissa's calls and messages, apologies, justifications, pleas piled up, unanswered. Dot, my truest friend, stood by me, offering silent strength. One day, walking through the botanical gardens, she asked, "What about the cottage? It's a mess now." I'd been grappling with that. "I'll restore it," I said, the decision firm. Not to what it was, that's impossible, but to honor its past and build my future. I hired a restoration specialist who valued old homes' souls. We salvaged scraps from dumpsters, found period replacements. The kitchen, reborn with warm wood cabinets, a farmhouse sink, and reclaimed barnwood countertops, echoed its heritage with modest updates. Every weekend, I worked with the craftsmen, learning skills my father would have loved. Each board, each fixture, mended my heart. 6 months later, spring revived the woods, and the cottage was whole. The kitchen felt alive, its layout traditional, its updates comforting. Dot saw it first, her eyes warm. "It feels right," she said. "Your family's place, renewed." I touched the new old kitchen table, its worn wood carrying the original spirit. "That's what I wanted," I said, heart full. On the rebuilt deck, we watched the sunset paint the lake gold and pink. "Heard from Ethan?" Dot asked gently. I nodded. The bank settled. He sold investments, took a loan to pay the fraud. The equity lines canceled, no charges filed. "And your relationship?" she asked while I sighed, watching loons on the lake. "We text about the grandkids, short, practical. I see Noah and Emma at the park or museum. But Ethan and Melissa, I don't know if I'll trust them again." Dot squeezed my hand. "They're lost, Sarah. They traded the priceless for the cheap." I nodded, the light fading. "But their betrayal gave me something unexpected. I'm living for me, not as daughter, wife, or mother, but as myself." That summer, I hosted book club friends at the cottage, our laughter weaving new memories. I rented part of it selectively, screening guests to protect its history. The income covered costs with extra for art, classes I'd always wanted. This wasn't the future I'd planned. It was better, hard-earned, true mine. The cottage stood as my fortress, its new locks guarding more than just the physical space. They shielded my hard-earned peace, my reclaimed independence, and the wisdom I'd pieced together after learning the painful lesson of misplaced trust. Rebuilding what had been shattered meant accepting that the past could never be perfectly restored. The cottage, much like me, carried the marks of betrayal, scars evident in the replaced beams and patched walls. Yet, through the wreckage, it had transformed into something stronger, more genuine, and undeniably mine. I felt a quiet pride in its resilience, a mirror to my own journey of piecing myself back together after Robert's departure. The morning after Claudia Jenkins called with the cottage's valuation, I found myself lost in thoughts about money, something I hadn't dwelled on so deeply in years. I'd always been the pragmatic one, meticulously stretching my principal's pension, tucking away modest investments when possible. Robert's betrayal had left me with one invaluable lesson: never depend on a man for financial stability. When he walked out, I threw myself into understanding finances, determined to never be blindsided again. That morning, I sat on the back porch, cradling a steaming mug of coffee, its warmth seeping into my hands as I watched cardinals dart around the feeder. Their vivid red wings stirred memories of my mother, who'd spent her last summer at our lake house, her eyes lighting up at every flash of crimson among the trees. "Cardinals are visitors from heaven," she'd say, her voice soft with wonder. "Always a good sign." No cardinal had appeared when Robert left, and I was grateful for it. His exit needed no celestial endorsement. As I sipped my coffee, I calculated what selling the cottage could mean for my future. Freedom, security, a chance to breathe easier. Those thoughts lingered as I drove to my weekly lunch with Dorothy at the Bluebird Cafe, a tradition we'd kept for over a decade since retiring from Cedar Grove Elementary. I'd been the principal, she the school nurse, mending scraped knees and soothing bruised feelings with equal care. As I slid into our usual booth, Dorothy's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Sarah, you're practically glowing. Did you hit the jackpot?" I laughed, unfolding my napkin with a flourish. "Better than that. The cottage is worth $1.2 million. Her fork hit the plate with a clink, her jaw dropping. "Since when?" she gasped. I recounted Claudia's call, the surprising valuation, and my cautious plan to sell. Dorothy listened, her spoon swirling her iced tea thoughtfully, her brow creasing slightly. "What would you do with all that money?" she asked. I leaned back, picturing it, helping Ethan with a down payment for a bigger home, setting up college funds for Noah and Emma, maybe even taking that European river cruise we dreamed about. "It'd give me some breathing room," I said, my voice tinged with hope, but Dorothy's hesitation was palpable. "What's on your mind?" I pressed. She sighed, her eyes soft with concern. "That cottage, it's your sanctuary. Every summer, it's where you come alive. Are you sure selling is what you want, not just what's best for Ethan?" Her words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they echoed a doubt I'd been pushing down. "I'm being practical," I insisted, though my voice wavered. "I'm 62. The taxes keep climbing and the upkeep's getting harder. I want to enjoy the money while I can." Dorothy nodded, but her skeptical expression lingered, planting a seed of unease. Later at the pharmacy, I ran into Helen Winters, who'd retired from accounting years before me and now filled her days with charity events and gossip. She'd known Robert and me during our marriage, her curiosity barely veiled as our divorce played out. "Sarah," she called, abandoning her cart to cross the aisle. "How's that handsome son of yours and those darling grandchildren?" I offered the usual updates: Ethan's promotion, Noah's soccer triumphs, Emma's blossoming art. Helen nodded, her smile sharp. "And Melissa?" she asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Still designing for those fancy city clients?" Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. "She's doing well," I said carefully. "Her business is growing." Helen made a vague hum. "I'm surprised she has time for clients with all her shopping. Marion saw her at Nordstrom last week buying 2 designer purses. Must be nice to have that kind of cash." I forced a polite smile, steering the conversation elsewhere. Helen thrived on hinting at others' flaws, and I'd learned not to fuel her. But as I drove home, her words gnawed at me. Ethan and Melissa had been vocal about their financial struggles. Childcare costs, the impossible dream of a bigger house. Yet Melissa was splurging on luxury? I tried to dismiss it. She worked hard. Maybe those purses were for her professional image as a designer. There had to be a logical explanation. That evening, as I pored over my finances, Ethan texted, "Mom, are you free tomorrow night? We'd love to talk more about the cottage renovation plans." I'd assumed they'd need time to craft a proposal, but apparently they'd been planning for a while. Curiosity piqued, I agreed, wondering what they'd come up with so quickly. The next morning, I volunteered at the community center's literacy program, helping Nadia, a Ukrainian immigrant in her 50s, practice her English. Her determination to rebuild her life after leaving everything behind struck a chord. "My daughter wants me to live with her," Nadia confided, her accent thick but her resolve clear. "But I say no. I need my own place, my own life. Family is important, but independence is—" She groped for the word. "Essential," I offered. She nodded fiercely. "Yes, essential." Her words echoed in my mind as I drove to Ethan and Melissa's townhouse that evening. Independence had been my lifeline after Robert, a prize I'd fought for. Was I too quick to let Ethan and Melissa steer decisions about the cottage, my most precious asset? They greeted me warmly, Ethan taking my coat while Melissa poured wine. Noah tugged me to admire his latest Lego masterpiece, and Emma shyly handed me a drawing of the lake house, her crayon strokes capturing its charm. Their affection melted my doubts, reminding me why I'd even consider selling for family. After the kids were tucked in, Melissa connected her laptop to the TV displaying polished design slides. We've been working on this for a while, she admitted, ever since our last visit to the cottage. We saw how much work it needed and wanted to be ready with ideas. They'd been planning before Claudia's call, before I'd even thought of selling. I kept my face neutral as Melissa launched into her presentation, her enthusiasm filling the room. We're calling it a modern lakeside retreat, she said, clicking through images of a transformed cottage. Walls were gone, creating an open-concept main floor. The kitchen faced the lake, gleaming with modern fixtures. The stone fireplace my grandfather built was replaced with a sleek gas model. The master suite sprawled, swallowing a bedroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows dominated the lake-facing wall, erasing the cozy intimacy I loved. What do you think? Ethan asked, his eyes bright with excitement. I sipped my wine, buying time. It's different, I said carefully. Beautiful, but it's barely the cottage I know. Melissa nodded eagerly. That's the point. The current layout is outdated, inefficient. Ethan chimed in. Premium lakefront rentals like this could bring in $3,000 to $4,000 a week in peak season. I thought of the built-in bookshelves my grandfather crafted, now absent from their designs. What about the family photos? Mom's quilts? The antique fishing gear? I asked. Melissa hesitated, exchanging a glance with Ethan. We thought those could be stored, she said delicately. They don't fit the aesthetic we're going for. The aesthetic? I echoed, my voice sharper than intended. Ethan leaned forward, his tone earnest. Mom, we know you love the cottage, but it's an underused asset. This renovation could boost its value even more. His words hung in the air, practical but jarring, as I grappled with the idea of my sanctuary becoming a stranger's vacation rental. The conversation over dinner had started innocently enough, but as Ethan and Melissa laid out their grand vision for the Lake Haven Cottage, I felt a knot of unease tightening in my chest. Their words were polished, their enthusiasm almost contagious, but beneath it all, I sensed something wasn't right. Melissa's eyes sparkled with ambition as she described transforming the cozy, weathered retreat into a sleek, modern rental property. Think of the income it could generate, Sarah, she said, her voice brimming with a conviction. With platforms like Airbnb, we could turn it into a goldmine. Ethan, my son, nodded in agreement, his face alight with a rare intensity. The upgrades would pay for themselves in no time, Mom. It's a smart investment. I shifted in my seat, my fingers tracing the stem of my wine glass as I tried to process their words. The cottage wasn't just a building to me. It was a tapestry of memories woven through decades of family summers. The creaky porch where I'd sip coffee at dawn, the scuffed wooden floors where my grandchildren had taken their first wobbly steps, the faded quilt on the sofa where Ethan used to curl up with a book. It was my sanctuary, a place where time seemed to pause. Their plan felt like an invasion, a betrayal of the cottage's soul. What about my time there? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. If it's rented out, when would I stay? Melissa's smile was quick, almost too rehearsed. You'd have first dibs, of course. We'd reserve any weeks you want. Plus, the rental income could fund trips to places you've always dreamed of. Maybe Europe. Don't you ever get tired of the same old summers at the lake? Her words were meant to entice, but they stung. The cottage wasn't a tired routine to me. It was home in a way my city apartment never could be. Ethan chimed in, his tone practical, almost paternal. The place needs work, Mom. The plumbing's outdated. The roof's on its last legs. Rental income would cover all that and more. Their logic was sound, but it felt like a sales pitch, not a discussion. They weren't asking for my input. They were unveiling a plan they'd already embraced. My unease deepened, a quiet alarm ringing in the back of my mind. What's the cost of all this? I asked, trying to steer the conversation back to reality. Ethan cleared his throat, a nervous tic I'd known since he was a boy. We've talked to a contractor. The estimate's around $300,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $300,000? I nearly choked on my wine, my heart racing. That's a quarter of the property's value. Melissa leaned forward, undeterred. It's an investment, Sarah. It'll boost the property's value significantly. With your excellent credit and the equity in the cottage, we can get great financing terms. Her confidence only fueled my growing panic. At 62, I'd spent my life being cautious with money, building a nest egg for a secure retirement. The idea of taking on that kind of debt felt reckless, almost obscene. I set my glass down, my hand trembling slightly. Let me be very clear, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I'm not taking out a $300,000 loan, not now, not ever. If we renovate, it'll be with cash and it'll be modest. Ethan's jaw tightened, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. Mom, that's short-sighted. Interest rates are at historic lows. This is the time to leverage the equity. His words felt like a lecture, and I bristled. I'm not leveraging anything, I shot back. I've been careful my whole life, and I'm not throwing that away now. The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Melissa's smile faltered, and Ethan stared at his plate, his knuckles white around his fork. Finally, Melissa spoke, her tone softer, conciliatory. We hear you, Sarah. Why don't we all visit the cottage next weekend? We can look at it together, talk through some less ambitious options that work for everyone. I nodded, though the unease clung to me like damp air. As I drove home that night, their words echoed in my mind, each one sharpening my sense of disconnection. Their vision for the cottage was so far removed from mine, a place of profit rather than peace. Worse, their casual assumption that I'd take on massive debt gnawed at me. It wasn't just presumptuous, it felt almost predatory. The next morning, I called my bank to schedule a meeting with a financial advisor. If we were going to discuss renovations, I needed to know exactly what I could afford without jeopardizing my retirement. The representative, a young woman named Jennifer, asked for my account details to set up the appointment. Then she paused, her voice hesitant. Ms. Thompson, I see you've recently applied for a home equity line of credit. Would you like to discuss that with the advisor too? My stomach dropped. That's a mistake, I said, my voice tight. I haven't applied for any loans. Jennifer's pause stretched longer this time. According to our system, an application was submitted online 3 days ago using your credentials. It's still processing, but it's been pre-approved for $350,000. My hands went cold, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't submit that application, I said, each word deliberate. Could there be an error? Jennifer's keyboard clicked in the background. The application was completed using your user ID, password, and the address of your property at 8721 Lakeshore Drive, Pine Ridge, Lake Haven Cottage. The world seemed to tilt. Someone had used my identity to apply for a massive loan against my property. The implications were overwhelming, a tidal wave of fear and betrayal crashing over me. I need to speak to your fraud department. Now, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. The next hour was a blur of security questions, account freezes, and grim explanations. The fraud specialist confirmed the application had come from an IP address in Cedar Grove, using my login credentials, social security number, and personal details. They'd even uploaded supporting documents, tax returns, bank statements, to complete the application. We'll investigate immediately, the specialist assured me. For now, we've flagged the application and placed a hold on your accounts. As I hung up, my mind raced, grasping for answers. Who could have done this? The question hung heavy, but one possibility loomed larger than the rest, too painful to fully confront. I called Frank, my financial advisor of 20 years, and poured out the situation. Is there any way to see what else might have been done in my name? I asked, my voice trembling. I can run a credit check, he offered. That'll show any recent inquiries or new accounts. I gave him the go-ahead, then sat at my kitchen table, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of it all. The cottage wasn't just a property, it was my legacy, a piece of my heart. The thought that someone could exploit it, could violate my trust so completely, was unbearable. And yet, the pieces were falling into place. Who else knew the cottage's value, had access to my personal information, and stood to gain from a $350,000 renovation? When Frank called back, his tone was heavy with concern. "Sarah, the credit report shows multiple inquiries from lenders. There's also a new credit card in your name, opened 2 weeks ago with a $25,000 limit. And someone's been checking rates on construction loans for vacation properties." My stomach twisted, a sickening wave of betrayal washing over me. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "File a police report immediately," Frank advised. "Then contact the credit bureaus to place a fraud alert. I'd also suggest changing all your passwords and consulting a lawyer." I thanked him, my mind reeling as I tried to process the scope of the deception. Before I could act, my phone rang again. The caller ID read Elite Renovations. I answered cautiously. "Ms. Thompson, this is Greg Barton from Elite Renovations," a man's voice said. "I'm calling to confirm our appointment tomorrow morning at your Lake Haven property. My crew will be there at 8 to start measurements and testing." My grip tightened on the phone. "I haven't scheduled any appointments with your company," I said, my voice sharp. He paused, confused. "That's odd. I have a signed contract authorizing a full renovation. It was signed by Ethan Thompson with your power of attorney." The words hit like a punch. "Power of attorney?" I repeated, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I've never given Ethan power of attorney." I demanded a copy of the contract, my tone leaving no room for argument. Within minutes, my email pinged with the document, a comprehensive plan for a $327,500 gut renovation, complete with a power of attorney form bearing my forged signature, dated 3 weeks earlier. It was a convincing fake, but a fake nonetheless. My son, my own flesh and blood, had not only applied for loans in my name, but had forged legal documents to seize control of my property. The weight of his betrayal settled over me like a suffocating fog. I printed the contract and added it to the growing file of evidence, each page a testament to the unraveling of trust. With a heavy heart, I drove to the Cedar Grove Police Department to file a fraud report. Officer Martinez listened patiently, his expression sympathetic but professional as I laid out the story. The unauthorized loan, the credit card, the forged power of attorney. I handed over copies of the documents, my hands steady despite the turmoil inside. When I finished, he leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Ms. Thompson, I know this is hard, but I have to ask, are you certain your son acted without your knowledge or consent? Family matters can be complex." "I'm certain," I said, my voice firm. "I didn't authorize any loans. I didn't sign any power of attorney, and I didn't approve that renovation. My property and my identity have been used fraudulently." As I spoke, the reality sank in deeper. Ethan and Melissa, the people I trusted most, had seen the cottage not as a family treasure, but as a means to an end, a financial resource to exploit. The pain of their betrayal was sharp, cutting through years of love and memories. But as I sat there, surrounded by the cold sterility of the police station, I knew one thing for certain. I would protect what was mine, no matter the cost. As I stepped out of the police station, the weight of their words, "We'll investigate thoroughly," hung heavy in my heart, a mix of reassurance and dread. My mind churned with disbelief, replaying the officer's advice. Keep working with the bank and credit bureaus to lock down my accounts and get to the cottage as soon as possible to check for unauthorized work. The thought of my family's sanctuary, a place woven with decades of memories, being tampered with made my stomach twist. My phone buzzed in my pocket, its screen glaring with the 3 missed calls from Ethan. My son. The name alone sent a pang through me, love tangled with betrayal. I wasn't ready to face him, not yet. Not until I'd seen the cottage with my own eyes and pieced together the truth. My fingers hesitated, then dialed Dot, my oldest friend, whose voice always carried a calm I desperately needed. "Dot, I need a favor," I said when she picked up, my voice trembling despite my efforts to sound steady. "Can you come with me to Lake Haven tomorrow morning? I need a witness." The word felt foreign, heavy with implication. A witness to what exactly? To the unraveling of my trust in my own son? Dot's voice, warm but laced with concern, broke through my spiraling thoughts. A witness? Sarah, what's going on? I took a deep breath and explained. My words measured at first, then cracking as I reached the part about the forged power of attorney. The document bore Ethan's name, his signature, claiming authority to act on my behalf, authority I'd never given. Oh, Sarah, Dot whispered, her voice thick with empathy. Are you sure? I clutched the phone tighter. I have the papers, Dot, his signature, authorizing everything in my name. I just need to see if they have already started tearing the cottage apart. Without missing a beat, she said, I'll be at your house at 6 tomorrow morning. We'll face this together. Her words were a lifeline, anchoring me in the storm of my emotions. That night stretched endlessly, each hour a battle between shock and grief. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment of my life with Ethan. How had it come to this? He was the boy I'd cradled, the one who'd run to me with scraped knees and later with teenage dreams. When had the distance between us grown so vast that he could betray me like this? The cottage wasn't just a building, it was the heart of our family's history. Summers by the lake, my grandfather's calloused hands laying each stone of the fireplace, my mother's laughter echoing in the kitchen as we baked together. What desperation or greed had driven Ethan to forge my name, to risk everything I held dear? The grief came in waves, each one crashing harder, leaving me breathless, my chest tight with the weight of a mother's love betrayed. By dawn, the tears had dried, replaced by a steely resolve. I needed answers, and I needed to protect what was left of my legacy. Dot arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, her thermos of coffee and a bag of scones, a small gesture of comfort in the chaos. You look terrible, she said bluntly, handing me a travel mug, her eyes soft with concern. But you're still standing. That's what counts. I managed a weak smile, grateful for her honesty and her presence. The drive to Lake Haven took just under 2 hours, the roads growing narrower and more rural with each mile. We spoke little, my focus consumed by the task ahead, my hands gripping the steering wheel as if it could anchor my unraveling world. As we turned onto the familiar gravel lane leading to the cottage, my breath caught in my throat. A massive dumpster loomed in the driveway, and a truck with the Elite Renovations logo was parked carelessly on the grass. My heart sank. They've already started, I whispered, my voice barely audible, my hands tightening until my knuckles turned white. We parked behind the truck and approached the cottage like trespassers in our own sanctuary. The front door stood wide open, and the sounds of hammering and power tools assaulted my ears, each strike a violation of the place I loved. Stepping inside, I froze, my heart plummeting into a void of horror. The living room, once a cozy haven of warmth and memories, was unrecognizable. Protective sheeting covered the original hardwood floors, but patches had already been ripped out, exposing the raw subfloor beneath. The built-in bookshelves, where I'd carefully arranged generations of family photos, my parents' wedding, Ethan's first fishing trip, my grandmother's gentle smile, were gone, reduced to bare studs jutting from the walls like broken bones. The stone fireplace, handcrafted by my grandfather in 1948, stood partially demolished, its river stones tossed aside in careless piles. Each site was a fresh wound, carving deeper into my soul. I moved through the cottage in a daze, Dot trailing silently behind, her presence a quiet strength. The dining room's wainscoting, polished by years of loving care, had been stripped away, leaving the walls raw and exposed. The vintage light fixtures, each one chosen by my mother for its charm, were missing, their absence like a theft of light itself. And the kitchen, my mother's kitchen, where I'd learned to bake bread, where I'd taught Ethan to flip pancakes, his laughter filling the air, was gutted. The cabinets, the sink, the memories, all gone, replaced by dust and debris. A man in a hard hat looked up from his clipboard as we entered the hollowed-out space. "Can I help you, ladies?" he asked, his tone polite but detached. "I'm Sarah Thompson," I said, my voice sounding distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "I own this property. Who authorized this demolition?" He glanced at his clipboard unfazed. "Let's see. Contract signed by Ethan Thompson, acting as power of attorney for Sarah Thompson. Work began yesterday." He looked up. catching the shock on my face. Is there a problem? My blood ran cold. Yes, there's a problem, I said, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. I never authorized this work. The power of attorney is fraudulent. The man, Greg Barton, I presumed from our earlier phone call, paled, his confidence faltering. Ma'am, I have a signed legal contract. We have already ordered custom cabinets and fixtures. The demolition is well underway. Stop all work immediately, I ordered, fighting to keep my composure as the weight of the destruction pressed down on me. My attorney will contact you regarding the fraudulent contract. Until then, nothing else is to be touched or removed from this property. The workers hesitated, then set down their tools, the sudden silence deafening. I pulled out my phone and began photographing the devastation, each snapshot a record of the betrayal. Dot stayed close, her hand occasionally brushing my arm, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone. The damage was staggering, not just demolition for a renovation, but a deliberate erasure of the cottage's soul, its history stripped away with every hammer strike. In what used to be my bedroom, I found a set of architectural plans spread across a makeshift table. My heart stopped as I studied them. The drawings depicted a structure that bore no resemblance to the cottage I knew. The modest three-bedroom layout, filled with intimate family moments, had been replaced with an open-concept entertainment space, featuring a gourmet kitchen, a master suite, and rooms labeled Bold, media room, and home gym. This wasn't a renovation, it was a complete rebuild, designed not for family but for profit, a luxury rental property meant to rake in cash from strangers. Dot's frown deepened as she pointed to a notation in the margin. Confirm lake frontage for dock expansion permit. My eyes scanned further, revealing plans for a boat dock, a lakeside sauna, and an outdoor kitchen, none of which Ethan or his wife Melissa had ever mentioned. The estimated cost for these additions alone topped $100,000. The full scope of their plan hit me like a tidal wave. They intended to spend nearly $500,000 of my money, without my knowledge or consent, to transform my family's legacy into their personal investment scheme. As I stood amidst the ruins of my cherished cottage, my phone rang, Ethan's name flashing on the screen. My hands trembled as I answered, putting it on a speaker so Dot could hear. "Mom, where are you?" he demanded, his voice sharp, devoid of warmth. "I've been trying to reach you since yesterday." "I'm at Lake Haven Cottage," I replied, my tone icy, "looking at what's left of my family home after your unauthorized demolition." A pause stretched across the line, heavy with tension. "Mom, you're overreacting," he said, his voice dismissive. "We discussed the renovation." My anger flared, breaking through my restraint. "We discussed a possible kitchen update, Ethan, not this complete destruction. And we certainly never discussed you forging my signature on loan applications or a fraudulent power of attorney." Another pause, longer this time. "Who told you that?" he asked, his voice tight. "The bank, the police, the contractor standing in what used to be my kitchen," I said, each word a stone dropped into the void between us. "How could you do this, Ethan? Your own mother." "It's not what you think," he said quickly, his tone shifting to defense. "Yes, I signed some paperwork to get things moving, but it was for your benefit. The property needs updating to maintain its value, and you were hesitating. I was just trying to help." His words felt like a slap, their casual justification cutting deeper than the betrayal itself. "By committing fraud?" I asked, my voice rising. "By destroying the cottage your grandfather built?" "That's unnecessarily dramatic," he snapped, his tone hardening. "It's just an old building that needed modernizing. We're increasing its value and rental potential. You'll thank us when it's done, and you're earning thousands in rental income every month." His dismissal of the cottage's significance, of my feelings, of the law itself, left me speechless for a moment, the hurt so raw it stole my breath. When I spoke again, my voice was steady, forged in the fire of my resolve. "The renovation will not be completed. The fraudulent loan will not be processed, and you will never set foot on this property again." "Mom, be reasonable," he sputtered, his confidence cracking. "I filed a police report naming you and Melissa as suspects in identity theft and fraud," I continued, my words unwavering. "I've contacted my attorney to begin legal proceedings to recover damages to my property. and I'm changing my will to ensure you never benefit from my assets in the future." "You can't be serious," he stammered, disbelief lacing his voice. "We're your family." "Family doesn't steal from family," I said simply, the truth of it settling like a stone in my heart. "Goodbye, Ethan." I ended the call, the silence that followed heavy but liberating. Dot's eyes met mine, her expression a mix of sorrow and admiration. "Sarah," she said softly, "are you sure about this? Once you start legal proceedings against your own son—" I cut her off, a strange calm washing over me. "He started this, Dot, when he forged my signature, when he applied for loans in my name, when he authorized the destruction of my family's legacy. Every step, he made choices knowing they were wrong, illegal, and hurtful." I took one last look around the gutted room, the echoes of lost memories lingering in the air. "I need to call my lawyer and the locksmith. Then we'll head back to Cedar Grove." By late afternoon, new locks gleamed on every door, a small act of reclaiming what was mine. The contractor had been served with a legal notice to halt all work, and my attorney had begun filing civil charges against Ethan and Melissa for fraud, property damage, and breach of fiduciary duty. The police investigation was underway, its wheels turning toward potential criminal charges. As I stood in the driveway, the cottage behind me, a shadow of its former self, I felt not just grief but a fierce determination. The betrayal had shattered something irreplaceable, but it had also awakened a strength I hadn't known I possessed. With Dot by my side, I drove away from Lake Haven, ready to fight for justice, to protect what remained of my legacy, and to rebuild, not the cottage, but my trust in the future. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft, fading glow over the winding roads back to Cedar Grove, Dot and I drove in heavy silence. The weight of the day clung to me like damp air, oppressive and unyielding. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale as I fought to keep my emotions from spilling over. Dot, ever the steady presence beside me, glanced over, her eyes soft with concern. Then she asked the question I'd been dodging all day, the one that sliced through the fragile dam I'd built around my heart. "What about Noah and Emma, your grandchildren, Sarah? How are you going to handle this with them?" Her words hit like a physical blow. Tears, hot and relentless, streamed down my face, the ones I'd held back through every gut-wrenching moment of the day. My voice cracked as I answered, "I don't know, Dot. I don't know how to untangle my love for those kids from the betrayal of their parents. How do I stay their grandmother when being their mother feels like a role I've failed at?" The words tasted bitter, heavy with the ache of a love now tainted by deceit. My son, Ethan, and his wife, Melissa, had crossed a line I couldn't fathom, and the wreckage they left behind wasn't just physical. It was the shattering of trust, of family, of everything I thought we were. Dot reached over, her hand warm and firm as it squeezed mine. "One day at a time, Sarah," she said, her voice steady but laced with empathy. "Protect yourself first. The rest will come when it's ready." Her words were a lifeline, but they couldn't quiet the storm in my chest. I nodded, staring out at the darkening road, the headlights cutting through the twilight like a feeble attempt to illuminate the path forward. When we reached Cedar Grove, I stumbled into my house, my body and soul utterly drained. I collapsed onto the bed, the familiar creak of the mattress a small comfort in the chaos. But sleep was a stranger that night. Every time I closed my eyes, vivid images assaulted me. The skeletal remains of the cottage, its walls reduced to rubble, the forged signatures scrawled on documents that bore my name, the architectural plans that would have erased every trace of my family's legacy, as if our history was nothing more than a sketch to be discarded. My heart pounded, a relentless drumbeat of grief and fury. Around midnight, my phone glowed with a notification, piercing the darkness. It was a text from Melissa, her words dripping with a calculated softness that made my stomach churn. "Sarah, please talk to us. This is all a misunderstanding. We were only trying to create a beautiful legacy property the whole family could enjoy. Ethan made some mistakes in how he handled the paperwork, but his heart was in the right place. Let's meet tomorrow and work this out as a family." A misunderstanding? Mistakes in paperwork? The audacity of their minimization ignited a fire in me. This wasn't a misstep or a well-meaning error. It was a calculated betrayal, fraud, theft, and the deliberate destruction of my property on a scale that left me breathless. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop, the screen's harsh light stinging my tired eyes, and began to write. I poured everything into that document, every detail, every wound. The property valuation that had seemed so routine at first, the early discussions about whether to sell or renovate, the sickening moment I discovered the fraudulent loan applications with my forged signature, the unauthorized demolition that had gutted the cottage my parents had built. I included dates, names, photographs of the wreckage, and copies of every damning document I'd uncovered. My fingers flew across the keyboard, fueled by a mix of rage and resolve, as I cataloged the betrayal in meticulous detail. By the time I finished, the clock read nearly 4 o'clock a.m. I saved the file, printed a copy for my records, and collapsed back onto the bed, my body finally surrendering to a restless, fitful sleep. The worst day of my life was over, but the shadow of its aftermath loomed large. The next morning, after just 3 hours of fractured sleep, I woke to a phone buzzing with missed calls and messages. Ethan, Melissa, and unfamiliar numbers, all clamoring for my attention. I ignored them, my focus narrowing to the tasks ahead. I had a meeting with my attorney, Patricia Winters, to review the evidence I'd compiled. I filed additional fraud reports with the credit bureaus, each form a small act of reclaiming my life. The process of securing what remained of my property and financial identity felt like stitching together the pieces of a shattered vase, knowing it would never look the same. Patricia's office was a haven of calm amidst the storm. She reviewed my documentation with a practiced eye, her expression a mix of professionalism and quiet sympathy. "You have a strong case, Sarah," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Civil damages are almost certain, and the police investigation will likely lead to criminal charges." She paused, her gaze meeting mine. "You have options. We can pursue full civil and criminal liability, or we could negotiate a settlement that avoids prosecution but ensures you're compensated for the damages." My mind felt numb, like I was moving through fog. "What would you recommend?" I asked, my voice hollow. Patricia hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Legally, their crimes are serious, and the evidence is overwhelming. But they're your family, Sarah. Criminal convictions could destroy their futures, jobs, housing, everything." Her words landed heavily, stirring a fresh wave of conflict within me. I nodded, the weight of the decision pressing down like a physical force. "I need time to think," I said, and she agreed, promising to file an emergency injunction to halt any further work on the cottage and freeze the fraudulent loan proceedings. As I left her office, my phone rang again. It was Helen Winters, a neighbor whose penchant for gossip usually made me wary. I nearly declined the call, too exhausted for her chatter, but something urged me to answer. "Sarah," she began, skipping any pleasantries, "I just heard the most disturbing rumor." Her voice was sharp, urgent. "Someone said Ethan and Melissa are telling people you've had a mental breakdown, that you forgot giving them permission to renovate the cottage and are now making wild accusations." My grip on the phone tightened, a cold fury replacing the numbness that had settled in my chest. "What?" I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Marion's daughter works at their pediatrician's office," Helen continued. "She overheard Melissa telling the doctor you've been erratic, forgetting conversations, inventing stories. They're suggesting you might be in the early stages of dementia." The words hit like a slap, each one fueling the fire of my anger. Not only had they stolen from me and destroyed my property, but they were now trying to strip away my credibility, to paint me as a frail, confused old woman to justify their crimes. I thanked Helen, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me, and asked her to keep me informed of any further rumors. For the first time, I heard genuine concern in her tone, not the usual curiosity. "Are you all right, Sarah? Do you need anything?" she asked. "I'm handling it," I assured her. "But I might need witnesses later, people who can vouch for my mental clarity." She promised her support, along with that of Marion and their bridge club, a small but unexpected lifeline. I drove straight to my primary care physician's office, my resolve hardening with every mile. Dr. Patel, who had known me for 15 years, was puzzled but cooperative when I requested a full cognitive assessment. I've seen no signs of cognitive decline, Sarah, he said, his brow furrowed. But if you're concerned, we can do a thorough evaluation. I shook my head. It's not concern, it's protection. I need documented proof of my mental health. 2 hours and several tests later, I had what I needed. Formal medical documentation stating that my cognitive function was excellent for my age with no signs of dementia or memory issues. I requested multiple copies, sending one directly to Patricia's office, a shield against the lies Ethan and Melissa were spreading. By late afternoon, I returned home, weary but fortified. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. A sense of unease prickled at the back of my neck. Moments after I stepped inside, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Ethan, Melissa, and an older man I didn't recognize standing on my porch. Ethan's face was a mask of earnest concern, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mom," he began, his voice carefully modulated. "This is Dr. Reynolds, a geriatric specialist. We're worried about your recent behavior and thought a consultation might help." The audacity stole my breath. They had brought a doctor to my home, uninvited, to evaluate me without my consent, as if I were a child or an invalid. My voice was low, controlled, but laced with steel. "Get off my property, all of you." Melissa stepped forward, her expression pleading. "Mom, please, we're just worried about you. These accusations, the police reports. It's not like you, Doctor. Reynolds just wants to talk." I turned to the doctor, whose discomfort was palpable. "Are you aware that these individuals are under investigation for fraud and identity theft? That they've forged my signature on legal documents and loan applications? Demolished my property without authorization?" Dr. Reynolds shifted, clearly caught off guard. "They mentioned some family disagreements about a renovation project," he said cautiously. "Not disagreements," I corrected, my gaze locking onto Ethan's. "Crimes." I stood taller, my voice unwavering. "I've been formally evaluated by Dr. Patel, who found my cognitive function to be excellent, with no signs of impairment. That documentation has been sent to my attorney to counter your disgusting attempts to discredit me." Ethan's face flushed, a crack in his facade. "Mom, you're blowing this out of proportion." I didn't waver. "If you don't leave now, I'll call the police and report you for harassment." I stepped back, beginning to close the door. Any further communication goes through my attorney. I locked the door and watched through the window as they retreated to their car. Ethan gestured angrily, his voice muffled but heated, while Melissa's shoulders shook with what looked like tears. Dr. Reynolds appeared mortified, and I felt a grim satisfaction at his unease. They had tried to weaponize medical authority against me, to have me declared incompetent so they could continue their scheme unchecked. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than the financial loss, a violation of my very identity. As their car pulled away, something within me solidified, a clarity born of pain. Whatever love and trust had once bound us was shattered beyond repair. They hadn't just stolen my property, they had tried to strip away my agency, my credibility, my sense of self. I picked up the phone and dialed Patricia. "I've made my decision," I said when she answered, my voice steady with resolve. "I want to pursue full civil and criminal liability. No negotiations, no settlements." She paused, hearing the steel in my tone. "Are you certain? This will likely end your relationship with your son for good." I glanced out the window, watching their car disappear down the street. "They've already ended it," I said quietly. "I'm just making it official." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the comforting familiarity of my home. Every detail meticulously arranged to my liking. Teacups neatly stacked, the faint scent of lavender from my candles lingering in the air. Yet as I stared at the grain of the oak table, I began the agonizing task of reimagining my life. A life stripped of my son, Ethan, and his wife, Melissa. A life where my bond with my grandchildren, once filled with laughter and bedtime stories, would now be fragile, distant, mediated by court orders or strained silences. A life where the family cottage, a sacred haven of memories, stood vandalized, its walls gutted, its spirit defiled by their greed. The weight of it all pressed against my chest, making each breath feel like a betrayal of the future I'd once envisioned. It was, without question, The darkest night I had ever endured, a night where grief seemed to seep into my bones. But as the first light of dawn crept over Cedar Grove, casting a soft glow across my garden, where the earliest spring blooms dared to push through the soil, something stirred within me. Amid the suffocating sorrow, a quiet resolve took root, sharp and unyielding, like steel tempered in fire. They had tried to strip me bare, my property, my savings, my reputation, even my sense of self. They had counted on my love for them to keep me silent, pliable, but in their calculated cruelty, they had ignited something they hadn't foreseen. My will to fight back, a fierce determination to reclaim what was mine. In the weeks that followed, the legal process unfolded with excruciating slowness, each day unearthing fresh wounds. The depth of Ethan and Melissa's betrayal came into sharper focus, each revelation a jagged cut to my heart. They hadn't just forged my signature on loan documents or manipulated a power of attorney. Their deception stretched back years, a slow, deliberate erosion of my trust. My attorney, Patricia, a woman whose calm professionalism masked a fierce tenacity, insisted on a meticulous financial audit. The results were staggering, small, almost imperceptible withdrawals from my accounts. 50 here, 100 there, stretching back nearly 3 years. Individually, they were negligible, blending seamlessly into my routine expenses. But together, they amounted to over $15,000, a fortune siphoned away under my nose. "It's a textbook tactic," Patricia said, her voice steady as we sat in her office, poring over the investigator's report. "They start small, testing the waters, seeing how far they can push before anyone notices. When there's no pushback, they grow bolder." I nodded, my throat tight, as I signed the affidavit confirming the transactions were unauthorized. Each stroke of the pen felt like a severance, another thread of my bond with Ethan fraying beyond repair. My son, the boy I'd raised with every ounce of my love, had orchestrated this betrayal. The district attorney, Patricia continued, believed the evidence was strong enough for criminal charges. But given the familial ties, they offered me the option to pursue it as a civil matter, a nod to the unbearable choice no mother should face. I sighed, my gaze drifting to the window where maple trees in the courthouse square were just beginning to bud, their tender green tips a cruel reminder of spring's promise of renewal. Inside, I felt only the icy grip of winter, a season of betrayal that refused to thaw. "What would you do?" I asked, turning to meet Patricia's eyes, desperate for guidance. "If it were your child?" She removed her glasses, her face softening with a sorrow that mirrored my own. "Sarah, I wish I could give you a clear answer. Legally, their actions demand prosecution. The evidence is airtight, their intent malicious. But as a mother," she paused, her voice faltering, "I understand the impossible place you're in." "I have to protect myself," I said, the words tasting bitter, as if I were convincing myself more than her. "They've shown no remorse, only escalation. The lies they're spreading, questioning my mental state, tarnishing my name in the community." Patricia nodded, her voice gentle but firm. "Then I think you know what you need to do. Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that bring the most clarity." That evening, I found myself driving through the familiar streets of Cedar Grove, the town that had cradled my life's joys and sorrows. The landmarks I passed, the elementary school where I'd served as principal for 2 decades, the park where I'd pushed Ethan on the swings every Sunday, the ice cream shop where we'd celebrated the end of each school year with double scoop cones, felt like relics of a different lifetime, belonging to a woman who no longer existed. Without realizing it, my car turned onto Elmwood Avenue, toward the modest colonial house where Robert and I had started our life together. The place where Ethan had taken his first wobbly steps, babbled his first words, and grown from a curious toddler into a stubborn teenager. I slowed as I approached, my eyes tracing the blue shutters, the white picket fence, the hydrangeas now blooming along the walkway. A touch I'd once dreamed of adding, but never did. A basketball hoop stood in the driveway, eerily similar to the one Robert had installed for Ethan's 10th birthday. That birthday, so full of joy, had been just weeks before my world unraveled, When I discovered Robert's affair with Vanessa, his colleague, the screaming matches, the cold silences, his eventual departure, they had left me alone with a 12-year-old son and a mortgage I could barely manage on a vice principal's salary. I had trusted Robert implicitly, never questioning his late nights or weekend conferences, just as I had trusted Ethan and Melissa when they proposed their renovation plans for the cottage, assuming their intentions were misguided but sincere. Had 30 years taught me nothing? As I sat parked across from the house, memories flooded back, not just of the betrayals, but of the signs I'd willfully ignored. Robert's growing emotional distance, the unexplained charges on our credit card, his sudden obsession with his appearance after years of indifference. With Ethan and Melissa, the red flags had been there too, their relentless questions about my finances. Melissa's designer handbags, despite their supposed money troubles. Ethan's casual dismissal of the cottage's sentimental value. In hindsight, the pattern was glaring, but I had chosen blindness, just as I had with Robert until the truth was undeniable. My phone's sharp ring shattered the reverie. It was Dot, my oldest friend, her voice brimming with concern. "Where are you? I've been knocking on your door for 10 minutes. I blinked, realizing how long I'd been lost in thought. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice hollow. "I went for a drive. I'm heading home now." "Are you okay?" she pressed, her tone softening. "You don't sound like yourself." "I'm fine," I lied, just remembering. 20 minutes later, I pulled into my driveway to find Dot waiting on the porch swing, a bottle of wine and 2 glasses at her side. "Spill it," she said as I sank beside her no-nonsense tone laced with warmth. "And I don't mean the wine." I took the glass she offered, the cool liquid steadying me as I spoke. "I've been thinking about patterns," I admitted. "How we keep making the same mistakes, trusting the wrong people." Dot's eyes narrowed. "You mean trusting people who don't deserve it?" I nodded, my voice catching. With Robert, I ignored the signs because I couldn't face the truth. With Ethan and Melissa, I did it again. Dot refilled our glasses, her movements deliberate. "Sarah Thompson, listen to me. There's a world of difference between trusting a spouse and trusting your child. One's a choice, a gamble. The other, it's woven into your soul." "But the result's the same," I countered, bitterness creeping in. "I'm left picking up the pieces while they walk away." "Not this time," Dot said firmly. "This time you're fighting back." We sat in silence, the streetlights flickering on as dusk draped Cedar Grove in quiet. Finally, I voiced the fear that had haunted me for weeks. What if it's my fault? What if I failed Ethan as a mother, and this is the consequence? Dot's response was swift, fierce. "Absolutely not. You were an extraordinary mother, devoted, selfless, pouring everything into that boy. Whatever path Ethan's on, it's his choice, not your failure." "But something went wrong, Sven," I insisted, tears prickling. "Kids don't just wake up and decide to steal from their parents." Dot sighed, her gaze distant. "If you're searching for a cause, maybe look at Robert's influence. Ethan spent his teenage years watching his father build a new life with the woman he cheated with, thriving while you scrape by. Those aren't exactly lessons in integrity." Her words hit like a thunderbolt. After the divorce, Robert had indeed prospered, his relationship with Vanessa blossoming into a marriage just 2 years later. Their life, luxury cars, exotic vacations, country club memberships, stood in stark contrast to the modest existence Ethan and I shared. Designer clothes appeared in his closet, gifts from Robert I couldn't rival. Ethan's weekends with them grew longer, his returns home marked by sullen discontent. "Robert made it look effortless," I murmured, "like betrayal had no cost." "Exactly," Dot agreed. "And teenagers soak that up. They see who's winning." I hadn't wanted to admit it then, but Ethan's attitude had shifted during those high school years, his dissatisfaction with our life growing as he compared it to the glossy world Robert offered. The seeds of his choices, perhaps, had been planted long before Melissa entered the picture. In those formative years when he learned that deceit could lead to reward. The visits Ethan made to his father's opulent new home cast a shadow over the modest apartment we shared, and those trips grew more frequent as time passed. The contrast gnawed at him, I could tell. His father's world of gleaming surfaces and effortless wealth stood in stark opposition to the life I'd worked so hard to build for us. By the time Ethan packed his bags for college, the warmth that once defined our bond had frayed, replaced by a tension I couldn't quite name. I chalked it up to the usual storms of adolescence, compounded by the lingering wounds of my divorce from his father, Robert. But deep down, I wondered if something more profound had taken root in Ethan, a shift in his core, a quiet unraveling of the values I'd tried so desperately to instill. Watching his father glide through life, untouched by the consequences of his actions, might have taught Ethan a different lesson, that integrity could be optional, that character might bend under the weight of ambition. I sat across from Dot, my oldest friend, in the dim light of my living room, my voice barely above a whisper as I poured out my heart. I tried so hard to show him what matters, I said, my words heavy with the ache of failure. I wanted him to see that honesty, hard work, and decency are worth more than any mansion or bank account. I wanted him to be better than his father. My chest tightened as I spoke. The memories of late nights helping Ethan with homework, of scraping by to afford his soccer cleats, of shielding him from the chaos of his father's absence flooding back. Dot's eyes softened, her voice steady but kind. Those lessons aren't lost, not forever. They're in him, even if he can't see it now, but you can't carry his choices for him. You've got to protect yourself, to build a future that's yours. Her words were a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of despair. She was right, the past was a weight I couldn't keep dragging. My future, at least, was still mine to shape. The next morning, I walked into Patricia's office, my heart pounding as I gripped the pen to sign the formal complaint against Ethan and his wife, Melissa. Each stroke of my signature felt like a small betrayal of my own, my hand trembling with the weight of what I was setting in motion. They had crossed a line, forging my name, attempting to siphon off my property. And though my heart ached for the boy I'd raised, my resolve hardened. They had made their choices, and now they would face the consequences. Patricia's voice was calm, professional, as she outlined the process. The district attorney will reach out to them directly. With the evidence we've got, they'll likely push for a plea deal to avoid a trial. That would mean admitting guilt, but it could lead to a lighter sentence. I swallowed hard, the reality crashing over me like a wave. What kind of sentence are we talking about? I asked, my voice barely steady. For first-time offenders in a white-collar case like this, she replied, it's usually community service, restitution, maybe a short jail term. It depends on whether they take responsibility or fight the charges. The thought of Ethan behind bars twisted my stomach into knots, a visceral pain I couldn't shake. But I pushed the image away. He had brought this on himself, on all of us. My duty now was to myself, to reclaim the life I'd put on hold for so long. As I stepped out of Patricia's office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Thompson, this is Lucinda Porter, Noah's kindergarten teacher. Could you please call me when you have a moment? It's regarding Noah's current situation. Noah, my grandson, only 6 years old, and his sister Emma, just 4. In the whirlwind of betrayal and legal battles, I'd been so consumed by Ethan's actions that I barely had time to process what this meant for my relationship with my grandchildren. They were too young to grasp the complexities of their parents' choices, but old enough to feel the absence of their grandmother's presence, the weekend visits, the bedtime stories, the warmth of our routines. My heart sank as I dialed Lucinda's number, bracing myself for what she might say. Thank you for calling me back, Lucinda began, her voice gentle but tinged with concern. I hope I'm not overstepping, but Noah talks about you all the time. Lately, though, I've noticed changes in him, things that worry me. I thought you might be able to help. My breath caught, a fresh wave of guilt washing over me. What kind of changes? I asked, my voice tight. He's been withdrawing, she said. He's struggling to focus, having emotional outbursts. He's been drawing these pictures, sad little sketches of what he calls Grandma's broken house. He keeps asking when he can see you again. Her words hit me like a physical blow, tears springing to my eyes as I pictured Noah's small, earnest face, his crayons scratching out his confusion and loss. I understand there might be family issues, Lucinda continued, her tone careful. I'm not asking for details. I'm just worried about Noah. Would you be able to send him something, a note maybe, just to let him know you're thinking of him? The request was so simple, yet it felt like a lifeline to the grandchildren I'd been torn away from. Of course, I said, my voice breaking, and thank you for reaching out, for caring about him. I sat in my car afterward, the weight of the conversation pressing down on me. Noah and Emma were innocent, caught in the crossfire of a war they couldn't understand. To them, I was the grandmother who baked cookies, who read The Very Hungry Caterpillar with silly voices, who tucked them in with promises of tomorrow's adventures. Now I was just gone, a sudden void in their lives. The thought of their confusion, their small hearts aching for answers, broke something inside me. That afternoon, I drove to a toy store and picked out a stuffed lion for Noah, its mane soft and golden, and a unicorn for Emma, its shimmering horn catching the light. At home, I sat at my kitchen table, pen in hand, pouring my heart into 2 cards. I miss you every single day, I wrote to each of them, my tears smudging the ink. I'm thinking of you always, and I love you more than you can know. I wanted to explain, to tell them why I'd vanished, but they were too young for the truth, too young to carry the weight of their parents' betrayal. Instead, I kept it simple, promising them my love was unshakable. I arranged for the gifts to be delivered to their school and preschool, knowing their parents might intercept anything sent to their home. It wasn't enough, but it was something, a small thread to hold us together until I could find a way back to them. That night, sleep eluded me. Restless, I found myself drawn to the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, a treasure trove of memories I'd collected over a lifetime. The scent of cedar and aging paper enveloped me as I lifted the lid, each item inside a fragment of a life I'd fought to build. There were photo albums, their pages worn from years of turning, Ethan's school projects, proudly displayed at science fairs and soccer games, handwritten letters from birthdays long past, in tiny baby clothes, folded with care. I pulled out Ethan's baby book, its pages a testament to my devotion. In my neat handwriting, I'd recorded every milestone. His first smile at 6 weeks, lighting up my world. His first tooth at 5 months, a tiny pearl in his gummy grin. His first steps at 11 months, wobbling into my arms. A lock of hair from his first haircut was taped inside, soft and golden, next to the hospital bracelet from his birth and a clay handprint he'd made for Mother's Day at 3. My fingers traced the edges of these keepsakes, and the question burned in my chest. How had we come to this? How had the boy who'd clung to me, his small hands gripping my legs each morning, become the man who would forge my signature and try to steal what I'd worked so hard to build? I dug deeper, pulling out school albums that captured Ethan's growth. There he was in his soccer uniform, his gap-toothed grin beaming as he held up a trophy, his pride infectious. Another photo showed him at the science fair, standing tall beside his first-place volcano project, his eyes bright with triumph. And then Ethan as a lanky teenager, earning his Eagle Scout badge, my arm around his shoulders as I beamed with pride. I had believed in him so fiercely, convinced he was becoming a man of honor, of integrity. Had I been blind to the cracks forming beneath the surface, or had something changed him along the way? The deeper I went into the chest, the heavier the memories became. Tucked away were the relics of darker times, the divorce papers, their stark legalese a reminder of Robert's abandonment, the court orders for child support he rarely honored, the journal I'd kept during those years, its pages filled with my struggle to keep our lives steady. I'd worked full-time, studied for my principal certification at night, and poured every ounce of myself into giving Ethan stability. I'd hidden my tears, my exhaustion, my fear, determined to show him we could thrive without his father. But children see more than we think. Had Ethan read my strength as coldness, my self-reliance as a refusal of connection? Had he resented the modest life we lived, so different from the extravagance Robert dangled before him? At the bottom of the chest lay a framed photo I hadn't looked at in years, one I'd taken down from my living room wall after Ethan's wedding. There he stood, dashing in his tuxedo, Melissa glowing beside him in her designer gown. I was to their left, smiling but slightly apart, wearing the blue dress I'd splurged on to fit into the polished world Melissa had insisted upon. On the right, Robert and his new wife Vanessa, dominated the frame, their confidence almost palpable. Robert's arm rested easily on Ethan's shoulder, Vanessa's hand on Melissa's arm, the four of them a picture of prosperity and poise. I hadn't seen it then, but now it was clear. I was the outsider at my own son's wedding, a necessary but not entirely welcome presence. My modest roots, the years of struggle, didn't fit the story they were crafting, a narrative of success that erased the sacrifices I'd made. Had it started there, this slow drift that pushed me to the margins of Ethan's life, had I been recast as the obstacle, the reminder of a past they wanted to forget? I closed the chest, the lid heavy with finality. The past couldn't be undone, and though I still searched for answers, I felt a new clarity about what lay ahead. Ethan was no longer the boy I'd raised. He was a man making his own choices, and I was a woman with years of life left to live. Whatever part I'd played in shaping him, for better or worse, was done. The next morning, Patricia's call jolted me awake, her voice unusually animated. "The district attorney just reached out," she said. "Ethan and Melissa have been offered a plea deal, but they're refusing it. They've hired Stanley Abernathy." My heart skipped a beat. "Who's Stanley Abernathy?" I asked, dread creeping into my voice. The revelation that Stanley Abernathy, the state's most relentless criminal defense attorney, was representing my son Ethan sent a shiver of dread through me. Known for his cunning defenses in high-profile cases, Abernathy thrived on twisting narratives to suit his clients. My stomach churned at the thought of what his involvement meant. Ethan and his wife Melissa weren't accepting responsibility for the fraud, forgery, and betrayal they'd inflicted on me. Instead, they were doubling down, planning to paint me as a confused old woman who'd authorized their actions but now suffered memory lapses. The audacity of it sparked a flicker of dark amusement in me, despite the gravity of the situation. Two separate doctors had evaluated me, confirming my mental clarity beyond any doubt. To think they'd resort to such a desperate tactic, it was almost laughable. But as my attorney, Patricia, pointed out, desperation made people unpredictable, even dangerous. Abernathy's reputation for turning victims into villains weighed heavily on my mind. He'd try to portray me as vindictive, manipulative, or unstable, anything to sow reasonable doubt in a jury's mind. I sat across from Patricia, my hands steady despite the storm of emotions swirling within me. "Let him try," I said, surprising myself with the calm resolve in my voice. The truth was my anchor, unyielding and undeniable. Yet Patricia's expression remained cautious, her eyes reflecting the weight of her experience. "Trials are unpredictable, Sarah," she warned. "Even in the best circumstances, they're emotionally exhausting. Are you sure you want to go through with this? There's still the option of civil remedies." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the unspoken toll this path would take. I leaned back, my mind wrestling with the decision. Backing down would mean letting Ethan and Melissa walk away from their crimes. Fraud, forgery, the calculated betrayal of using my identity for their gain. As their mother, I'd spent decades nurturing Ethan, sacrificing for him, and to let them escape accountability now felt like a betrayal of my own principles. If I didn't stand up, what message would that send? That family ties excuse criminal behavior? That my life's work, my identity, my property, my future could be plundered without consequence? Patricia's voice softened, tinged with respect but also concern. "No one would judge you for choosing a less confrontational path. This is your son, Sarah." Her words pierced me, stirring a deep ache. Ethan, the boy I'd raised, now stood on the opposite side of this legal chasm. Yet my resolve hardened. "This is my life," I countered. "My identity, my security, they were willing to sacrifice it all for their own greed. If I don't fight now, where does it end?" Patricia nodded, her eyes reflecting both admiration and a quiet warning. "Then we'll prepare for trial, but brace yourself, it's going to get ugly." She wasn't exaggerating. Within days, the small town I'd called home for decades buzzed with whispers, rumors about my mental state, my relationship with Ethan, and the real story behind the charges spread like wildfire. Former colleagues called under the pretense of concern, their voices dripping with curiosity they barely bothered to mask. Neighbors who'd once waved warmly now avoided my gaze, crossing the street to dodge conversation. The isolation stung, a sharp reminder of how quickly trust could erode. But amidst the betrayal, unexpected allies emerged. Helen Winters, a fiery friend from the senior center, became my fiercest defender, shutting down gossip with sharp retorts and rallying a support squad of friends who made a point of being seen with me in public. Dot, my loyal companion, stuck by my side during grocery runs and errands, her presence a shield against the stares and hushed voices. Their loyalty warmed my heart, a lifeline in a sea of judgment. The deepest cut, however, came from a place I never expected. Returning home from a meeting with Patricia, I found an envelope in my mailbox, unmarked and ominous. Inside was a formal letter from the Cedar Grove Community Church, where I'd worshipped for over 30 years. It informed me that my volunteer work with the children's ministry, teaching Sunday school, a role I'd cherished since Ethan was a boy, was suspended pending the resolution of current issues. The words hit like a physical blow. I'd poured my heart into that church, organizing food drives, serving on committees, attending services, even after my divorce left me broken. To be deemed unfit to read Bible stories to children, based solely on rumors, felt like a betrayal of everything I'd believed the church stood for. My faith community, the people who preached truth and justice, had turned their backs on me. The rejection burned, a wound deeper than I cared to admit. That Sunday, I sat in my usual pew, chin held high, refusing to cower under the weight of sidelong glances and whispered conversations. After the service, Pastor Richards approached, his face a mask of careful neutrality. "Sarah, I hope you understand the church's position," he said. "We're not taking sides, but with accusations like these, we have to be cautious." His words ignited a spark of anger in me. "Accusations?" I replied, my voice steady but sharp. "Pastor, there is documented evidence. Forged signatures, fraudulent loans, destroyed property. Those aren't accusations. They're facts." He shifted, visibly uncomfortable. "Melissa's parents have shared their perspective. They're worried about their daughter's reputation, and they're valued members of our congregation." The mention of Walter and Catherine Blake, Melissa's parents, explained everything. Their generous donations funded the church's youth programs and mission trips, their influence far outweighing my quiet decades of service. "So the truth matters less than the size of their checkbook," I said quietly, the words heavy with disappointment. Pastor Richards flushed, insisting the church was simply awaiting the legal outcome. "We're called to show grace to all involved," he said. "Grace without accountability isn't grace," I shot back. "It's indifference masquerading as virtue." I walked away, my heart heavy, but my determination unshaken. If even my church could be swayed by influence over evidence, I had to see this fight through. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal maneuvering. Abernathy lived up to his reputation, filing relentless motions to dismiss charges, suppress evidence, and undermine my credibility. Each move felt like a personal attack, a calculated effort to erode my resolve. But as the trial date loomed, an unexpected development shifted everything. Patricia called me to her office where she sat reviewing a thick document, her expression unreadable. "They've offered a new plea deal," she said. "Ethan will plead guilty to all charges, take full responsibility, make restitution, and accept whatever sentence the court imposes, if Melissa is granted immunity." I stared at her, stunned. Ethan, my son, was willing to bear the full weight of their crimes to shield his wife. "Why would he do this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia shrugged. "Love, fear, financial dependence? Who knows? The DA believes Melissa was the mastermind, but they'll accept Ethan's plea to secure a conviction without a trial's risks." The offer was a lifeline and a trap, forcing me to weigh justice against mercy. The thought of Melissa walking free, likely the architect of the fraud, felt like a miscarriage of justice. Yet the alternative, a grueling trial, seeing Ethan in the defendant's chair, our family's pain laid bare for all to see, was almost unbearable. I thought of my grandchildren, Noah and Emma, already scarred by their parents' actions. Noah's drawings of a broken house haunted me, a child's rendering of a fractured family. Could I subject them to more pain, more loss? If both Ethan and Melissa were convicted, they'd face jail time, probation, fines, and felony records that would shadow their futures and their children's. The weight of the decision pressed down on me, a collision of principles I'd once held so firmly. I need time to think, I told Patricia, my voice heavy with uncertainty. You have until Friday, she replied. 3 days to decide between justice and mercy, accountability and grace. A choice that would define not just my future, but my family's. As I drove through the quiet, tree-lined streets of Cedar Grove, the weight of my decision pressed heavily on my heart, a tangle of love, betrayal, and the fierce need to protect the innocent. My grandchildren, Noah and Emma, their faces so full of trust and vulnerability, haunted me. No matter what I chose, they would bear the scars of their parents' actions. Instead of heading home, I found myself steering toward Lake Haven, drawn to the crumbling remains of the family cottage. That place, now a skeleton of its former self, stood as a silent witness to everything I'd lost and everything I still hoped to save. Maybe there, amid the ruins of one life and the faint promise of another, I could find the clarity I so desperately needed. The April afternoon was crisp yet radiant, the sunlight glinting off the lake as I pulled into the gravel driveway. The construction debris and heavy equipment that had once cluttered the property were gone, leaving behind an eerie stillness. The contractor had followed my orders, boarding up the exposed walls, clearing away hazards, but leaving the damage untouched, like an open wound. I unlocked the new front door, a cheap, temporary replacement for the hand-carved antique that had welcomed generations of my family, and stepped inside. The air was thick with the musty scent of neglect, and dust swirled in the beams of light that slipped through the gaps in the boarded windows. The exposed beams and half-demolished walls loomed around me, a stark reminder of the home that had once cradled my family's story. As I moved cautiously through the gutted rooms, my footsteps echoed in the hollow space. I tried to look past the devastation, to see the potential that still lingered. The foundation remained solid, unyielding. The lake outside was as breathtaking as ever, its tranquil beauty untouched by human failings. And the memories, those were mine, forever etched in my soul, no matter how much of this place had been torn away. I found myself in what used to be the kitchen, now an empty shell. An overturned bucket served as my only seat, and I sank onto it, closing my eyes. In the quiet, the past came rushing back, vivid and aching. I could almost hear my father's warm, patient voice as he taught me to knead bread on the counter that no longer stood. My mother's soft humming filled the air as she scrubbed dishes in the sink that had been ripped out and discarded. And Ethan, my Ethan, so small and bright-eyed, giggling as we shaped pancakes into Mickey Mouse ears, flour dusting his cheeks. Those moments were real. They had woven the fabric of who I was, who Ethan had become. No wrecking ball could erase that truth. When I opened my eyes, the destruction around me took on a new meaning. It wasn't just the ruin of a cherished cottage. It was the wreckage of a family broken by cycles of betrayal. 30 years ago, Robert's infidelity had shattered our marriage, leaving me to pick up the pieces. Now, Ethan's deceit had done the same to his own family. The pain of it cut deep, but beneath the anger and grief, I saw something else, the chance to break the cycle. Someone had to choose a different path, to stop the hurt from spiraling into another generation. I rose, brushing the dust from my jeans, and stepped outside to the weathered dock that stretched into the lake. The water lapped gently at the pilings, a soothing rhythm that grounded me. Above, 2 ospreys wheeled in the sky, their sharp cries piercing the stillness. Life went on, indifferent to my turmoil, and in that moment of quiet connection with the world around me, I found my answer. It wasn't about choosing between justice and mercy, or punishment and forgiveness. It was about deciding who I wanted to be, a mother, a grandmother, a woman, moving forward into the unwritten pages of my life. The legal system would decide Ethan and Melissa's fate. My role was to chart my own course. As I drove back to Cedar Grove, the sun dipping low and painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, a strange peace settled over me. The road ahead was still daunting, the choices painful, but for the first time since uncovering Ethan's betrayal, I felt a flicker of hope. Not for reconciliation. Some wounds were too deep, some bridges too charred to rebuild, but for transformation. Perhaps from this crucible of pain, something new could emerge. Something beautiful, not just for me, but for Noah and Emma. and maybe one day even for Ethan. At a stoplight, I grabbed my phone and sent a quick text to Patricia. I've made my decision. Let's meet tomorrow morning. The light turned green and I drove into the gathering dusk, ready to step out of the shadows of the past and into whatever future lay ahead. The next morning, I arrived at Patricia's office at 9 a.m. My decision solidified after a night of reflection that left me feeling strangely calm. The fog of uncertainty had lifted, replaced by the quiet strength of knowing my own heart. Patricia greeted me with a warm but concerned smile. "You look better today," she said, her eyes searching mine as I settled into the chair across from her desk. "More resolved." "I am," I replied, my voice steady. "I've decided to accept Ethan's plea deal." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, surprise flickering across her face. "May I ask what brought you to this decision?" I paused, gathering my thoughts to explain the complex web of emotions and realizations that had crystallized at the cottage. "Two things mainly," I began. "First, Noah and Emma. They're innocent in all of this, and they've already lost so much stability. If both Ethan and Melissa are convicted, the impact on their lives would be catastrophic. I can't let them suffer more than they already have to." Patricia nodded, her expression softening with understanding. "Children always pay the highest price in these situations." "And second," I continued, my voice growing more certain, "I've realized that what I want isn't vengeance. It's accountability and the hope for change. If Ethan is willing to take responsibility, even if it's partly to protect Melissa, that's a step toward owning his actions. It's not everything, but it's a start." "I understand," Patricia said, meeting my gaze with quiet respect. "But I have conditions that must be part of any agreement." For the next hour, we carefully crafted the terms I insisted on. Full restitution for the damage to the cottage, a formal acknowledgement that I had never authorized any loans or renovations, and ironclad legal protections to ensure Ethan and Melissa would never again have access to my finances or property. But the condition I held closest to my heart was the requirement that certified copies of all fraudulent documents be sent to Robert and Vanessa Thompson, Ethan's parents. "They need to know exactly what their son has done," I told Patricia when she raised a question about it. "For years, they've been cast me as the bitter ex-wife who couldn't let go. It's time for them to see the truth about Ethan, not just their rose-tinted version of him." The district attorney called Patricia the next day to confirm that Ethan had accepted all my conditions. The hearing was scheduled set for the following week, with civil proceedings to follow address restitution. That weekend, restlessness gripped me, a mix of anxiety and anticipation. On a whim, I called Diana. "Are you free today?" I asked, a sudden impulse sparking in my chest. "I'm thinking of doing something a bit different." 2 hours later, we were at Transformations, the trendiest Shaikas salon in Cedar Grove, surrounded by the hum of blow dryers and the scent of expensive hair products. When my stylist called my name, I handed her a magazine clipping of a sleek, shoulder-length cut with soft layers and side-swept bangs. "What, and have you ever thought about going a little lighter?" she suggested, tilting her head as she studied me. "Not blonde, but maybe some caramel highlights to brighten your natural color." I met my own gaze in the mirror, seeing the same familiar, weary reflection I'd faced every morning for decades. That woman had always chosen practicality over joy, duty over desire. But I wasn't her anymore, or at least I didn't want to be. "Yes," I said, a smile tugging at my lips. "Let's do the highlights." 3 hours later, I walked out of the salon, my hair falling in soft, face-framing layers that made my cheekbones pop and my eyes shine brighter. The caramel highlights caught the afternoon sun, adding warmth and vibrancy to my natural brown. I felt transformed, not just on the outside, but deep within. "Sarah Thompson," Diana said, circling me with a proud grin, "you look absolutely radiant." For the first time in years, I believed it. I didn't just look presentable. I felt beautiful, alive in a confidence I hadn't known I still had in me. That evening at Antonio's, Cedar Grove's finest restaurant, I couldn't help but notice the glances cast my way. David Winters, a successful real estate developer and Helen's son, paused stopped by our table, his eyes widening in surprise. "Sarah Thompson? Wow, you look different. Fantastic, I mean." "Thanks," I said, feeling a flush warm my cheeks. Just felt ready for a change. It suits you, he replied with a genuine smile before heading back to his table. Well now, Dinah murmured, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Looks like David Winters noticed the new you. Monday arrived under a gray, drizzly sky. I dressed with care in a tailored, charcoal gray suit, slipping on my mother's pearl necklace for strength. The outfit was professional, dignified, fitting for a mother about to watch her son plead guilty to crimes that had wounded her deeply. The courtroom was smaller than I'd pictured, its intimacy making it all the more daunting. I took my place in the far end of the bench in the row behind the prosecutor's table, my gaze locked straight ahead as the room filled with quiet footsteps and hushed voices. When Ethan entered, I steeled myself, my heart aching with a mix of love and pain, ready to face the consequences of his actions and the beginning of my own new chapter. As Ethan stepped into the courtroom, flanked by his attorney, I allowed myself a single deliberate glance. His appearance struck me like blow. His face gaunt, etched with exhaustion, dark shadows pooling beneath his eyes, his skin sallow and unfamiliar, as though the weight of his choices had drained the life from him. My chest tightened, not with pity, but with the ache of a trust so thoroughly broken. The proceedings unfolded with a brisk efficiency that felt almost mechanical. The judge entered, her presence commanding yet detached, and the charges were read aloud: fraud, theft, betrayal laid bare in cold legal terms. Ethan rose to deliver his plea, his voice barely a whisper, trembling with something I couldn't quite name. "Guilty, Your Honor," he said so softly the judge leaned forward, asking him to repeat himself. He did, louder this time, but the words still carried the weight of defeat. The sentence came swiftly. 6 months in county jail, 3 years of probation, full restitution for the financial wreckage he'd caused, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent ban from ever touching my finances or property again. As the bailiff moved to escort him away, Ethan turned toward me, his eyes searching, almost pleading. I met his gaze, steady and unyielding, neither accusing nor absolving. For a fleeting moment, I thought I glimpsed something deeper in his expression, not just regret for being caught, but a raw, aching sorrow for the irreparable harm he'd inflicted. It stirred something in me, a flicker of the past we'd shared, but it wasn't enough to soften the walls I'd built. Outside the courtroom, Melissa approached, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. "Sarah," she began, her voice fragile, barely holding together. I raised a hand gently, cutting her off. "Not here," I said, my tone soft but firm. "Not now." She bit her lip, nodding but pressed on, her voice trembling. "Can I call you about the children? They miss you so much." My heart clenched at the mention of Noah and Emma. Their innocent faces flashed in my mind, Noah's crayon drawings pinned to my fridge, Emma's gap-toothed smile as she giggled in my arms. The wreckage of adult betrayal had torn through their lives too, leaving them caught in the crossfire. I hesitated, weighing the pain of the past against the love I still carried for them. "You can email me," I said at last. "We'll figure out something that works." It wasn't forgiveness, nor was it a full reconciliation, but it was a fragile thread of connection, a narrow path for 2 small children to reach me across the chasm Ethan's actions had carved. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in months, the weight of the courtroom behind me. By morning, a quiet resolve had taken root. I decided to return to Lake Haven Cottage, not to mourn what had been lost, but to reclaim it, to rebuild something new from the ashes of destruction. Notebook in hand, I began sketching ideas for the cottage's restoration. Not a futile attempt to recreate the past, that was gone forever, but a vision of renewal that honored its history while embracing a new purpose. The kitchen, once the warm heart of the home, would remain central, but I imagined a more practical layout with open shelving crafted from salvaged wood, echoing the handiwork of my grandfather. Modern appliances would replace the outdated ones, chosen to blend seamlessly with the cottage's rustic charm. As I walked through the gutted rooms, jotting down notes, a spark of excitement began to replace the grief that had clung to me for so long. This project wasn't just about restoring a building, it was about restoring myself, a tangible act of resilience in the face of betrayal. I was so immersed in my planning that I didn't hear the car pulling up until a knock sounded at the open front door. Startled, I looked up to see David Winters standing in the entrance, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm, his expression warm but cautious. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his voice tinged with apology. "My mother mentioned you might be here today, and I was nearby for a property assessment. I thought I could offer some professional input, if you're open to it." Grateful for the unexpected company, I invited him in. We spent the next hour walking through the cottage, David offering insights on structural repairs, potential upgrades, and estimated costs. His expertise was clear, but he never spoke down to me, his suggestions thoughtful and collaborative. As we stood on the lakeside deck, I explained that the restitution from Ethan's case would cover the core restoration, but I was considering additional improvements to make the cottage sustainable. Better insulation for year-round use, solar panels to cut energy costs, perhaps a small addition for a private office or studio. I gestured toward the shimmering lake, its surface catching the afternoon light. "I'm thinking of spending more time here," I admitted, "not just summer weekends." David nodded, his interest genuine, and promised to send contractor recommendations before taking his leave. His visit left me energized, and I returned to my notebook with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time since Ethan's betrayal had upended my life, I was looking forward, not back, dreaming of possibilities instead of picking up the pieces. In the days that followed, I threw myself into the project, interviewing contractors and ultimately choosing a woman-owned firm led by Teresa Jimenez, who specialized in historic renovations. Teresa understood my vision immediately, to preserve the cottage's soul while enhancing its functionality. "We can save more than you think," she assured me during our first meeting, her confidence grounding. "The original hardwood floors can be restored, even where they've been damaged. The fireplace stones were set aside. We can rebuild it exactly as it was. And I know a craftsman who can recreate your grandfather's bookshelves from the photos you showed me." I signed the contract that day, a sense of certainty settling over me as the restoration took shape. Work would begin the following week, with completion projected for late summer, just in time for quiet evenings on the rebuilt lakeside deck. During this time, I arranged carefully supervised visits with Noah and Emma at neutral places like the Children's Museum or the park. The first visit was tense, Melissa hovering nervously, the children unsure how to bridge the gap created by their father's actions. But by the third visit, a rhythm emerged. Melissa would drop them off and return later, giving us precious, uninterrupted time. Noah's initial wariness softened as we built towering sandcastles or tossed bread to the ducks, his laughter a balm to my heart. Emma, ever exuberant, smothered me with sticky kisses and clung to me, demanding to be lifted at every turn. They never asked about Ethan directly, though Noah once mentioned Daddy being away for work. I let the explanation stand, knowing the truth was too heavy for a 6-year-old to carry. An unexpected opportunity arose when David mentioned a community center project in Pine Ridge that needed an educational consultant to design learning spaces for children and adults. "With your background as a principal, you'd be perfect," he said over coffee. Our meetings now a regular part of my routine. The idea of meaningful work, of applying my skills to a community-focused project, was deeply compelling. I took on a part-time consulting role, which quickly grew as my contributions gained recognition. As spring turned to early summer, the cottage restoration progressed steadily. Walls were rebuilt, floors refinished, windows replaced with energy-efficient models that preserved the original aesthetic. The kitchen took shape, modern yet timeless, with salvaged wood shelving and a farmhouse sink that echoed the one from my childhood summers. I spent weekends at the cottage, often staying overnight in the small bedroom, finished first at my request. Those evenings, sipping wine on the partially rebuilt deck as the sun dipped below the horizon, became a sacred ritual, a moment to reflect on the work ahead and the life I was building. The community center project thrived too, my designs for flexible learning spaces, earning praise from local officials and future users. David floated the idea of a full-time role once the center opened, one that would involve developing programs for learners of all ages. It would mean moving to Pine Ridge, he noted during a planning session, his tone careful but encouraging. The idea took root instantly. Leaving Cedar Grove, where I'd lived for over 3 decades, would mean leaving behind painful memories and whispered gossip. Pine Ridge offered a fresh start, a place where I could build a life defined by purpose rather than past wounds. By midsummer, the cottage was nearly complete. The exterior gleamed in its original gray with blue shutters, subtly enhanced with a larger deck and discrete solar panels. Inside, the rooms felt familiar yet refreshed, a balance of memory and renewal that mirrored my own journey. The kitchen, once a battleground where Melissa's disregard for my boundaries first reared its head, had been transformed into a space that was unmistakably mine. I could still recall the sting of betrayal when I'd noticed her careless rearrangement of my things, pots shoved haphazardly into cabinets, my favorite mugs stacked without thought. It wasn't just about the objects. It was the violation of a space I'd considered sacred, a quiet corner of my world where I could exert control. Now, standing in the heart of my reinvented kitchen, I felt a rush of pride and relief. The worn Formica countertops, scratched and stained from years of use, were gone, replaced by sleek granite that gleamed under the soft glow of pendant lights. Where ancient, temperamental appliances once groaned, new ones stood, efficient, modern, and chosen by me for their quiet reliability. Open shelves lined the walls, showcasing my carefully selected collection of pottery and glassware. Each piece a deliberate choice, arranged with precision to reflect my taste, my vision. This wasn't just a kitchen anymore. It was a declaration of my reclaimed independence, a tangible testament to the life I was building on my own terms. The day the contractors packed up their tools and left, I lingered in the renovated cottage, letting the weight of the transformation sink in. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and polished wood, and the silence was profound, broken only by the soft creak of the new floorboards beneath my feet. The space felt like an old friend who'd undergone a remarkable change, familiar in its bones, yet entirely new in its expression. The walls still held echoes of the past, of laughter and tears, of moments that had shaped me. But now they were adorned with my choices, soft, earthy tones that soothed my soul, furniture arranged to invite peace rather than chaos. It was as if the house itself had exhaled, shedding the weight of old memories to make room for the future I was carving out. Standing there, I felt a quiet thrill, a sense of possibility that had been absent for years. This cottage, this life, was no longer defined by what had been taken from me, but by what I was choosing to create. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, I settled onto the rebuilt deck, a sturdy expanse of cedar that stretched toward the lake. The water shimmered, painted in vibrant hues of gold and crimson, as if the sky itself were celebrating my new beginning. A loon's haunting cry drifted across the lake, its mournful yet beautiful call stirring something deep within me, a mix of nostalgia for what had been and hope for what was to come. In my hand, I held a new set of keys Teresa had given me during our final walkthrough. They were more than metal. They were symbols of a fresh start, each one gleaming with promise. Teresa's eyes had sparkled with understanding as she handed them over, her quiet smile acknowledging the weight of the moment. These were the keys to my new life, a life I was stepping into with intention and courage. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of moving my belongings from Cedar Grove to Lake Haven. The thought brought a flutter of anticipation, tinged with the bittersweet ache of leaving behind the familiar. Cedar Grove had been home for so long, its rooms filled with memories of raising children, of navigating the complexities of family. But it was also a place tied to choices that weren't entirely mine, to compromises that had left me feeling tethered. Lake Haven was different. It was a blank canvas, a place where I could define myself anew. I imagined unpacking my books, arranging them on the shelves I'd chosen, each one a piece of my heart. I pictured my grandchildren running through the cottage, their laughter filling the air, their visits untainted by the strained dynamics of their parents' decisions. I was determined to build a relationship with them that stood on its own, rooted in love and presence rather than obligation or expectation. Beyond the move, I was ready to take another bold step, submitting my application for the full-time position at the community center. The idea of working there, of contributing to a space that fostered connection and creativity, filled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I could already envision myself there, organizing events, teaching classes, sharing the skills and passions I'd honed over a lifetime. It wasn't just a job, it was a chance to weave myself into the fabric of this new community, to belong in a way that felt authentic. Each step I took, moving, applying for the job, nurturing my relationships, was deliberate, a brick laid in the foundation of a future I was crafting with my own hands. The locks on the cottage had been changed, both literally and metaphorically. The old ones, rusted and worn, had been pried open by too many hands that didn't respect my space. The new locks were mine alone, their keys a promise of control and safety. Standing in my transformed home, I felt a shift within myself. For decades, I'd moved through life with a mix of acceptance and resignation, making peace with circumstances that often felt beyond my control. But now something new stirred in my chest, a spark of genuine excitement. It wasn't just about the cottage or the new appliances or the carefully arranged pottery. It was about the life I was stepping into. One where I could finally say, "This is mine." As the last rays of sunlight faded from the lake, I leaned back in my chair, the cool metal of the keys pressed against my palm, and let myself dream of what lay ahead. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something to endure. It felt like something to embrace.